Dash.io Armory deck is about to come out, and Dash looks to be one of the best decks in the entire game. To talk about it, I have a very special guest and a good friend returning to the channel to dive into the impact of this Armory deck, Mara Faris. Mara, introduce yourself to anyone that doesn't know who you are. I know there's probably not many people.
Hi, Pheano. I'm flattered that we're friends. That's the nicest thing I think you've ever said.
I know I say a
Uh,
lot of mean things.
you do. No, it's great. I love coming on the channel. I love hanging out. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Mara Faris. I am a professional artist and altarist, and also a professional flesh and blood player, I guess, at this point. I've got a bunch of top eights. Second approach about Baltimore. I think I have 5 battle hardened top eights at this point. Top 8 realm 50k or no realm 20k. I don't know, a bunch of stuff. I have a lot of top eights and not a lot of wins. I'm real good. I'm real good at getting close.
Relatable. I got my very first LL point only within like 6 months ago, so I know what that feels like.
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah. I was really well known for my Dromai play for a very long time. Uh, I got the nickname the Empress of Volcor, which is my favorite nickname of all time. Uh, and lately I have been playing a whole lot of Dash.io, so pretty excited about taking over the meta.
Now, before jumping into the meat and potatoes of this video, it's going to be divided up into 5 cards. First of all, we're going to have Mara's history with the class. Then, why should you be playing Dash.io and the strengths of the hero? Then we're going to be diving into some of the basics of just like what Dash is actually trying to do if you're kind of newer to the class. Then we are going to go over the new cards that she's getting out of the Armory deck. And then we're going to be doing a bit of a deeper dive into some of the intricacies of the heroes. And I'm sure we're going to ramble in between, though I suggest you watch the whole thing, because if you are interested in one section, there's going to be, little bits here and there where we're going to kind of touch on different things. But if you only want to hear about one part, there is going to be timestamps down below, as well as the deck list in the description. Now, jumping into your history.
The last time you invited me on this channel, we rambled for like 4 hours about Dromai. You know what you're getting into.
It was a good ramble. That was a very good video. That was one of my favorite
Yeah.
videos on the channel. Yeah, I was gonna say, what was your history with mech? Like, you're known as illusionist person, so why do I got you on here talking about mech? You brought that to the last Pro Tour also, right?
I did, and U.S. Nationals.
Oh, I didn't know that one.
Oh yeah, that was the I think a big part of the reason that Dash.io has so much momentum right now is I was 7-1 in CC at U.S. Nationals with Dash.io.
Mm-hmm.
That's its own little funny story. So yeah, as far as my history of mech, I started the game in Monarch like just before Everfest came out, and it was literally when I first started playing the game, it was this like very close coin flip between learning the game on Prism and learning the game on Dash. I kind of fallen in love with both heroes, and it literally just came down to I picked one of the two at random, and ended up on Prism, and so uh, ended up just like on this train of becoming this like very well-known illusionist main. But mech had always been this little side project of mine, something that I've just had for quite a while. But I'd never really done a whole lot with it, just like armories and little fun casual things for forever. And then Dash.io came out, and I kind of fell in love with it. But again, I didn't do that much with it initially. And it wasn't until Worlds in Barcelona, or just before Worlds in Barcelona. It was like right after Tome came out for Dromai, where Dromai was before this hero that was like very good at doing pretty good at events, but wasn't really winning a whole lot. Dromai before the PQ season, right before Barcelona, or was the PQ or RTN season right before Barcelona, or before was it Barcelona? Yeah, before the Worlds, yeah. Had like 150, 190 LL points, and then that ProQuest season gained like
To the moon.
300 LL points, and then Aaron Chance top aided Worlds and was staring down the barrel of another 300 LL points, and we were looking at Dromai potentially rocketing from like 200 LL points to like 900 and something, like over the course of a month. And I had a real panic moment where I was like, oh god, I am not prepared for this hero to LL. This is like the only hero that I've really ever played competitively since Prism LL'd. And so I had set a New Year's resolution for myself that year, that I was banned from playing Dromai at any Sunday event. So like if we ever like had a battle harden on Saturday and there was a like a PQ plus on Sunday, I was no longer allowed to play Dromai at those Sunday events because I needed to make myself have to learn another hero because I wanted to make sure I could prepare for when Dromai was eventually going to leave.
Mhm.
Um, and I dabbled with a couple other heroes. I played a little bit of Azuri. I played a little bit of a couple other things. But Dash IO was kind of that one that had already been sort of sitting on the back burner for me for a while. And I was like, I like this hero. This hero's a lot of fun. And nobody really understands how this hero works, and nobody really is respecting this hero. So it was one that I started playing at these Sunday events, and having a little bit of success with. I did pretty well with her for a little bit. Um, but it was still always just like a funsies thing, a little back burner thing. And then Dromai LL'd, and then it was like, all right, time to figure out the new thing. And I was very convinced that the new thing was going to be Enigma. Like I like Enigma a lot. I still, you know, she's a super interesting hero, but she is a lot different than Dromai.
It's a lot different
And
specifically than the way that you played Dromai also, because the
yeah, that's fair.
for
You're right.
people
You're right.
that
She's a lot different
don't
than.
know how you interacted with that hero, you were a very aggro slanted version of Dromai in the past, where Dromai
Yeah,
for people coming into the game, Dromai kind of went two different directions. You could either play this grindy, we called it big dragon version of the deck, where you played this heavy blocking version of the deck that went long, or you played more the Mara version, where we would call that the red line version of the deck, or you called it Empress, where it was a very two block focused, go wide aggro deck. It almost looked like a Briar deck of old, but instead of Rosetta, you had dragons. And
Yeah.
Enigma's not
As
that.
I burn them all was Rosetta Thorn at home.
Or Asvali was Rosetta at home. I think that's the
Yeah.
two and two
As I
still.
burn. Well, so Asvali plus burn them all is 2-2.
Uh,
Unless you're in the Dromai mirror, then Asvali was just burn them all, or was Rosetta at home. But in every other matchup, Asvali burn them all was Rosetta Thorn at home.
so like Enigma, very blocky version of the deck. So like maybe someone that played the other version of Dromai might like that version a bit more, but for you, where you're, no blocks, 4/4/4 dragon, it's not how you're trying to interact with the hero.
That's very true. Enigma not particularly known for her 0/4s with Go Again, which is my favorite kind of cards. I like 0/4s that have Go Again. That's kind of my thing. Um, but so yeah. Anyway, so we started testing for U.S. Nationals. Me and Team Ascent, my testing team, and I was just like all in on, okay, Enigma's the deck. Enigma's the thing that I want to play, and I was doing a lot of testing on Enigma. And as we as that like metagame started to sort of solidify, and we started to see this rise of Zen and these like very aggressive, oppressive like aggro decks that Enigma was really struggling with. Um, and I remember there was a day where like we did this like little metagame breakdown where we all sat down together and wrote down all the heroes and all of their like rough approximate win percentages into everything else. Like I think Runaways does this. Like, a couple of that Card Guys does do one of these too. And they're super useful to be able to like actually ratio out like how much of a metagame you think each hero is going to be and like what their win rates are into everything else, and actually like calculate it all out and say like, okay, what heroes are actually looking the best in this meta. And we ran all of our numbers, and Enigma numbers didn't look great, mostly just because her Zen matchup was so bad and we expected so much Zen. And I was getting a little discouraged, and I was like, I'm going to put the Dio numbers up just because, I don't expect anyone to play Dio at this, but like, just in case, I want to just see where she falls in this metagame so that we can kind of have an understanding of all the decks that are possible. And I plugged in all the Dio numbers, and her numbers into the meta were really good. She had a good matchup into Zen. She had a good matchup into Chaos. She had a good matchup into Enigma. Like all of these decks that we felt like were going to be very omnipresent. Um, and so like I had this heart to heart with my team. I was like, somebody please convince me that I should not play my Funsies Armory deck at a Nationals. Uh, like these numbers look really good, and I definitely should not play this deck. It's a funsies weird deck that like I've just been playing casually, but like all the math looks really good on it. And I spent like several weeks like begging someone to convince me not to play this deck at nationals. And no one could come up with a good reason. And I started doing some testing with it, and I was like, yeah, this deck actually is competitive in this metagame. Uh, and so finally, I was just like, all right, I'm just gonna play Dash IO at nationals, and I'm just gonna see what happens. And I honestly didn't expect to do that well. Like I went in and was like, this is just gonna be here. I don't really want to play Zen. I don't feel comfortable with Enigma in this meta. I'm just gonna run this. And then went 7-1 in CC. My only loss being to Mo Bogsley, who was one of my testing partners on New, my worst matchup, in a matchup that like the New really has to understand how that matchup plays. And like because he'd been testing with me, he understood the matchup, and he was the only assassin I lost to on the weekend. I beat like 4 News and 2 Azuris on the weekend, and that was my only loss at nationals in CC. And that kind of sparked a lot. Like I got a lot of attention for that. I got a lot of new patrons. I got a lot of people very suddenly like a lot of these like Dash IO mains that have been sort of languishing in the shadows for a while because no one's really put that deck in the spotlight. Um, and it was pretty cool. And so yeah, so we just started working on the deck a little bit more and started doing a little bit better. And yeah, and I've just kind of been playing the deck ever since. Um, Deck's real good. It's a deck that a lot of people don't quite understand how it works and don't
It is a very
respect its
complicated
damage
deck.
output. Yeah, and honestly, that was I think the biggest thing for me. Like this is kind of silly, but like comparing like Dash IO to Zen, I think both were these like very fast, very explosive, aggressive decks. Um, but I always felt like playing Zen, I didn't have as much agency as I wanted. I felt like playing Zen was just like I'm gonna just put my hand on the table and you're gonna tell me if you're dead or not. Um, Whereas Dash IO has a shocking amount of little decisions that can make or break your games. And I like that. Like I feel like if I want to go into a tournament, um, if I don't believe that I'm just the best player there, then like why am I there?
Mhm.
And I want to play a deck that lets me leverage that skill. Like I don't want to just like high roll my way through a tournament. I want to be able to say like, okay, I can play my deck better than you can play your deck, and I'm going to prove it. Um, that was what drew me to Dromai. Dromai was a deck that was just incredibly skill intensive. The number of decision points you made in any given game that was like they were like significantly impactful were huge. And Dasho feels very much the same way. Like it's
Lots of
definitely
little
a very
micro
different style of deck, but
decisions.
yeah, tons. Like even just knowing the top card of your deck is so relevant so often and can fundamentally change the way you play turns or even like your entire game. Um, the number of times that I've been like in the middle of an aggro turn against like an Enigma, and then like you just like see a high octane on the top of your deck, and now you have to make this like very real decision of I'm in the middle of a big turn. Do I just boost past this high octane to keep pushing this damage right now? Do I just stop right now? Arsenal card, draw this high octane, set up for a potentially bigger turn later. Like you have just all these little choices that make such a big difference in that deck.
And now you have even more
And,
with the processor where it's like, well, do I play in such a way where I give myself the opportunity to draw that card off of the processor? How do I sculpt the top of my deck so that way I can draw the card that I need when I want to? Is
oh,
this the card I
absolutely.
want here? Is like, do I boost this? Do I draw it? Do I leave it on top for next round? All these like little things with that.
Yeah, and it's what made me fall in love with the class is just all the little micro decisions. It's one of the few just very aggressive aggro decks in the game that I feel like really rewards a ton of reps and skill expression. Like I say, I think most of these big aggro decks that we tend to see are very face up. Zen was kind of like this, Phi was like this, Aurora is pretty much like this. Like you have decisions to make, and I'm not at all going to disparage aggro. I like playing aggro, um, but you do have a lot of these aggro decks that a large percentage of your hands kind of play themselves. I don't think we've seen an aggro deck as decision heavy as Dio since Chain.
I have actually been making a lot of comparisons to this deck with Chain. Processor, I've been joking like in our internal like testing and everything. Feels like build your own shackles.
Yeah, it absolutely does. I super agree. Like I think that was one of the reasons that like I was really interested in Chain. And I'm actually like kind of sad that like I never really got to play Chain. Chain's reign was like very early in my Flesh and Blood experience,
Chicago.
and I was kind of all in on the Prism chain, and I wasn't like, I think everybody starts out, you have like one deck, and then you learn your one deck, and then you kind of start branching out to other heroes. I was still in my like, I have one deck like era of learning Flesh and Blood when Chain was really at his peak. And then by the time that I was interested in like really learning what I enjoy, Chain was already gone.
Before we get on to a tangent about Chain, let's jump back to
Sure.
Dash. So broadly
All right.
speaking, in Dash IO, what are we trying to do in the deck, and like how are we winning games?
That actually has multiple answers depending on who you ask. Personally, I think the answer to that is boom grenades. Boom grenades are just insanely above rate. Um, they are playing a boom grenade off the top of your deck is one of the most powerful things I think you can be doing consistently in Flesh and Blood. A boom grenade off the top is effectively like a red boom grenade off the top. It represents 4 damage plus an action point plus a gun counter to use that action point on. So it's roughly equivalent of just 6 damage for 1 resource that did not cost you a card. It would be the equivalent of being able to play a 1 for 6 with go again that says draw a card on it. Like
So,
if they
pretty good.
printed that card, it would be insane. It would be banned in minutes. And Dio gets to play 9 copies of it.
It doesn't draw like
Um,
37 cards. So we don't get the band in minutes on that one.
Sure. Okay. Does not draw. It's not quite. It's not quite Kraken's Aether Vein. You're right. Actually, it is better than Kraken's Aether Vein without without amp.
Okay,
Um.
so we're trying to do above rate things in the deck. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah. Like I mean, you're at your core. You are absolutely an aggro deck. You're an aggressive deck. You are trying to deal as much damage as possible as quickly as you can. Generally, the best way to do that is you want to be leveraging Boom Grenade. You want to be doing everything you can do to find grenades on the top of your deck consistently, play them, and then connect with them. Because that's the other part. I think that last part is the piece that people seem to kind of forget in Dash IO. A
It's
lot
not
of
just scare
people,
target opponent.
yeah, like if you just put a Boom Grenade in play and then your opponent blocks it out, then you didn't actually do that much. Like you can argue that like you got a little bit of value because them blocking is probably worth more, like worth less value to them than attacking. But at the core, like if you're not hitting with boom grenades, you're not actually achieving the goal of your deck. You're not actually progressing the game state.
So how
Um,
are we connecting with them?
so we want to play a bunch of attacks. And notably, something that I really like to play is I like to play a whole lot of 4-power attacks. We talked earlier about my love for 0 for 4s. Um,
Wait, but this has a one in the
and
corner. How can that be in your
yeah, I
deck?
know, because we play every 0 for 4 they're allowing us to play. Uh, I'm actually one of the most exciting things in the new deck is Fast and the Furious, which is another 0 for 4. Very hyped about this card.
This card's
Just
nuts.
another 0 for 4. Card is
We'll get
nutty.
back to
It's
this
great.
one later, but this card's nuts.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, so at its core, what the deck wants to do is play a bunch of boost cards that let you dig through your deck as quickly as possible and get the most chances to find a boom grenade on the top of your deck, just by the nature of just being able to just shred through the top of your deck as quickly as possible. The more times in a turn that you can change the top card of your deck, the higher the chance that you can find a grenade.
Mhm.
And then you want to put yourself in a position where as soon as you find that grenade, you can send as many uncomfortable breakpoints to your opponent as possible to make sure that that grenade connects. You can put you can put an opponent in these weird situations where they like if you have a grenade out and you have 3 cards in hand in an arsenal, you can send that first 4 and then you make them play that game of like, okay, I can commit to block to this 4, but how many more do they have? Am I gonna overcommit all of my blocks and then still get the grenade hit anyway? At which point I just fall super far behind? Do I just have to kind of suck it up, eat the grenade on the first hit, and then just hope that I can come back with my hand? And you can put your opponent in some very, very uncomfortable positions by leveraging that like kind of psychological warfare of boom grenade. And so the other thing that you'll see a lot of in this list is evasive damage that denies armor blocks. We have Fender Bender, we have Outpace, and we have Scramble Pulse. Um, because the way most people are going to be blocking a lot of fours is by leveraging armor. And if we can kind of deny that armor block, we can get a lot more of those awkward situations where your opponent might have to start having to commit 2 cards to cover a 4. And we can get really far ahead that way. And again, just more ways to make it to where like once we find the grenades, we can connect with them. Because I think that is the most important thing to be doing in the deck. And I think it's something that you always want to kind of keep in the forefront of your mind when building this deck is when you're adding a new card in your deck, you have to say, I want to make sure I can connect with boom grenades every turn. Does this card let me connect with more boom grenades? And if that answer is no, then you need to have some very serious considerations on whether that card belongs in the deck.
So we're a linear aggro deck that's trying to play significantly above rate and create awkward situations for our opponent where we're going to leak through a lot of damage on them because they can't actually defend against what we're doing.
Right.
So
Mhm.
what are some of the biggest power cards in the deck beyond Boom Grenade? Anything that you're trying to like warp your game plans around at all, or just like these are just like reasons to be in the deck?
Sure. So personally, I think the reason to be in the deck is Boom Grenade. I think, like I say, we kind of touched on Boom Grenade is just the most powerful thing I think you can be doing. But we do have 2 other really big ones for me, and a third one that we'll go into that I don't like as much. But Spark of Genius and High Octane are, I mentioned earlier, if any card does not directly contribute to connecting with boom grenades, you have to really, really consider why it's in the deck, and you have to make sure that that card deserves to be in the deck. Um, High Octane and Spark of Genius are the 2 cards that really, I think, hit that mold. High Octane has this ability to just generate a ton of action points. Um, which, for the purposes of landing our boom grenades, doesn't actually do that much. Um, most of the high octane turns prior to the new armory deck are usually used for just unloading a ton of pistol counters. Um, Symbiosis Shot, every time you play an item, puts a counter on it, and then you can spend one of those counters to attack with the gun, but this is not a once per turn action. So particularly in like your fatiguey matchups, these matchups where they really want to block, and the boom grenades might not be quite as reliable. Um, High octane lets you kind of go over the top on those matchups. It lets you set up a big turn where you can get like 4 boosts off, and then just unload all of your gun counters for an additional like 10 damage. Um, it is really potent, and it's one of your best tools for being able to close out those fatigue games. Um, Prior to this new armory deck, though, High Octane in the aggro matchups was actually always a little bit kind of mid. It was okay. You can usually end up with like a couple of gun counters, and so you might be able to set up a hacking turn that gets 2, maybe 3 gunshots, which is still good, and it was enough that like was worth inclusion in the aggro matchups, but was never particularly exciting in the aggro matchups. Cerebellum Processor is going to dramatically change that, and we'll get into that once we get into the new cards.
We'll put a pin in that
Um,
one for one moment.
yeah, yeah, we'll come back to that because Cerebellum Processor is going to have a lot of discussion on it. But for the most part, High Octane was reasonably good in your aggro matchups and really, really important in your control matchups. Spark of Genius, however, is the other card. Um, Spark might be my personal favorite card in the deck. Um, Spark of Genius just kind of does everything you want all at once. Um, it is an incredibly, incredibly flexible card. It's an incredibly powerful card. Um, it offers up so many unique different play lines. And I think we talked earlier about all of the um, the little micro decisions that can really shape a game. Every Spark of Genius turn, if you have a Spark of Genius in your hand, there's suddenly a dozen new lines open to you at any given point with that card. And knowing which line to really go down is really important to playing this deck, I think. I can cover like the most frequent Spark of Genius lines. Again, pre-Cerebellum processor. I think there was 4 really major ways that I use Spark of Genius. You can use it as a, like, if you draw it on turn 0, you can just use it as a setup. I'm very partial to turn 0 Spark of Genius for a Teklo Pounder or a Plasma Mainline, which are both in the sideboard. Both of these are excellent cards for your grindy fatigue matchups. Just getting you a lot of value over multiple turns. So early, like using it very early just to take these setups is great. But once you get into kind of the meat of the game, spending 4 resources on a Spark is kind of tough. You can still do it on occasion, but it becomes a lot rarer than just having it on turn 0 for these big setups. So the other 3 kind of main uses of it are sparking for a core, for a Teklo core, makes for very, very strong setup turns. If you have a turn that you're like, this turn is kind of middling, I'm gonna do some damage, or maybe I've played the grenade off the top already and I don't need to push more damage on this turn, and I just want to set up so that my next turn is very powerful. You can end your turn by just playing a Spark of Genius, getting a Teklo core, setting the Teklo core, you get the Teklo core, you get the gun counter for playing an item, and the Spark of Genius will draw you a card, which sets you an arsenal. So now you're going into your next turn with a 5-card hand and 2 free resources, is just setting you up for a very, very big turn. And sometimes you really need to be able to set up those really big turns.
Which then sets you up for connecting with your boom because you have
Yeah,
access to so much.
yeah, like on those turns, like you get to dig very deep because you have a lot of cards. You don't have to be pitching. You can just be boosting more. You get to just, we talked about like just getting to change the top card of your deck as many times as possible. And having a 5-card hand where you already have 2 resources floating is really good for looking 5, 6, sometimes even 7 deep to try and find another grenade. And they're really, really powerful setup turns.
Mhm.
The second one, which is honestly the one that when I first started playing the deck, I was the most hesitant on, but as I come into this game, is the one that I think I use more than anything, and that is sparking for a backup protocol. Um, Backup protocol is a card that for the longest time I kind of hated. I was just like the math on this card is not particularly great. Um, it costs you a card and 2 resources to be able to just play 1 attack, which isn't great on its own. Like that's a little bit below rate. We're just sort of adding additional resources to the cost of our attacks, and this deck is not typically flush with resources. You usually only want about 1 blue a turn, so having to invest those extra resources in backup protocol is not super appealing. But what I found the more I playtested with it is backup protocol is an incredible consistency tool. It is never going to be the best card in your deck. It is never going to be the most powerful card in your deck. But man, those turns where you just have an okay hand and you need to turn it into a good hand, backup protocol will save your day so many times. And that's, I think, one of my favorite Spark of Genius lines is, I have a Spark and a good red boost, and I've got 2 blues. And that hand on its own would just be kind of meh. You're just like, I have these 2 blues, I can't really do a whole lot with them. I'm going to just send a blue 0 to 60 for 2. But because you have Spark now, you can play your 1 red boost, Spark for a backup protocol just one of your other great attacks, and then you get to draw another card so that you can hopefully find another red attack. And you can do things like, I can play my 1 boost, I can draw a card, send a second attack, and then backup protocol for a pulse wave harpoon and just like rip my opponent's hand apart. I have the resources available that I can still play a grenade off the top of my deck. And suddenly we've taken this very mediocre hand and turned it into an excellent one. Um,
Nice thing there too is you can kind of change your mind and what you grab off the protocol based on what you draw off the spark. Where you're like,
yeah,
okay,
absolutely.
if I'm planning on doing this, but if I hit
Mhm.
another blue off of the top, okay, I'll dump that into the protocol to get a an attack that costs more resources. Or if I hit a
Yeah,
red off the top of my spark, okay, I'm gonna play a bit of a leaner resource round, so I may want to get a cheaper attack off the backup, and to kind of have this modality of based on how many resources you end up with after the draw.
yeah, absolutely. And it's actually you'll notice there's exactly one copy of Heist and one copy of Scramble Pulse in the main deck, and that's exactly why. Um, because once we have these cards, now we get just a ton more flexibility out of these backup protocols. Um, it's just it's such a good glue piece, and Spark just makes that even better because now we get those two backup protocols where, like I mentioned, they're not a card that you usually want to see, but you're glad you have in your deck. Um, and with the three sparks, now we have access to 5 copies of this card for when we need them. But if we don't need them, the sparks can turn into, like I said, we these the core setup turns, or the other really common spark play that is the most flashy and is one of my favorite, but is one that I don't do as often. And I think I see other people do probably more than they should, which is spark for a boom grenade. Uh, Spark for a boom grenade is a billion damage. Like there's not a lot of ways around that. Um, Spark for a boom grenade just means we just spent a card, got to draw a card, and got 4 damage on the table plus another counter on our gun. It's literally just kind of that same we were talking about being able to spend one resource to do 6 damage and draw a card. Well, Spark for a grenade just does the same thing for 0 resources.
How are we converting this all into damage after playing this spark since this doesn't have go again?
Oh yeah, sorry, that is probably relevant. So Spark of Genius does not have go again, which is why if we're sparking for a Teklo core, we have to do that at the end of our turn because the Teklo core also does not have go again. However, there's an interesting interaction with any of the items with Crank. Crank just says when this enters the arena, you can remove a Steam counter from it, and if you do, gain an action point.
Not when you
That
play it, when
Crank
it
will
enters, so it's not like a cast trigger type of thing.
Yeah, so it's not like Go Again. Go Again will not trigger if it's just put into the arena, but Crank will. So we can play the Spark of Genius, go get a Boom Grenade, and then we can choose to crank that Boom Grenade, and then we will gain an action point off of it, even though it was put into play off of the Spark and not just played from hand. So the same line with the backup protocol, you can do the same thing. So that's where we can use these Spark of Geniuses kind of as a turn extender. And that's where, like, if your opponent just wants to no block anything and they just want to race you, then having the ability to spark for a boom grenade is excellent. And spark for a boom grenade was probably one of the reasons that I felt so good in the Zen matchup, despite Zen being so explosive, because getting to have a turn where I can go play an attack, play a grenade off the top, play a spark, get another grenade, and then send another attack or two after that. Against a hero that just does not want to block, represents just a ton of damage.
Hey,
Um,
just so ridiculously above rate. That's like not
oh yeah,
including the card you draw. That's a 0 for 6. And
yeah.
then if
Um,
you just equate the average card off the top of your deck to 3 value, that's a 0 for 9.
mhm.
And you play a lot of very good cards, so you're getting more than 3 value out of most of your cards.
That said, though, I mentioned that like the spark for boom grenade is a line that I don't take that often, and it's a line that I think more people probably take that people take more often than I think they should, because spark for grenade, if you are very confident that you can push that grenade, is insanely powerful. However, because of the way you have to play it, you have to crank the grenade because otherwise, like we mentioned, you don't get the action point. So you only have this turn to connect with that grenade. That grenade will die at the start of your next turn. You don't get an option to, maybe save it for the next turn like you do. Like if you play the grenade off the top, there are some times where you're like, oh, I'm 3/4 of the way through my turn. If I play this grenade off the top, I'm only going to send one more attack. And if they just block that attack, I just wasted this whole grenade.
And you're always down
Spark for
like one
grenade.
attack after doing this because you had to boost before playing it.
Right. Spark for grenade, we've probably already spent a card to pitch because most of our attacks are 1-for-4s. We've probably spent a card for pitch, and we've had to play at least one attack. So we've already spent 2 cards. We're gonna spend that spark. So at the most we can possibly have is 1 more card in hand and a card in arsenal. And then we are blind drawing off of that spark. So if we blind draw and we just hit an item, we have to be able to look at the cards that are just in our hand and say, do I think whatever cards are left in my hand can guarantee that I'm going to hit this grenade? Because if you send that line and you get that grenade, your opponent, unless they are very, very confident in their ability to kill you, is going to probably start blocking immediately. Because you've now said, I only have 2 cards, and these 2 cards now say on hit 4 damage. There is very few hands that your opponent's going to have that are more above rate than block 2 cards, gain 4 life. Like you were basically handing your opponent this, hey, if you block this out, your blocks are way above rate. So like when you take the spark for grenade line, you have to be very confident in what you have, regardless of what card you draw, or you have to be in a position where you have to gamble on that draw to be able to close out a game. Which sometimes like you're in a position where like I have to take this risk because I'm gonna lose the game if I don't. I see a lot of people kind of tunnel vision on that, like, oh, this is just gonna be awesome. If I connect with everything, I'm gonna do a billion damage and I'm gonna be miles above rate.
Well, Mara, what do you want? You just spent like 30 minutes explaining to people the whole reason to play the deck is boom grenade. Now you're telling people don't get boom grenades? Make up your
I
mind.
mean,
You're gaslighting us.
the reason to play the deck is connecting with boom grenades. If you don't connect with boom grenade, it is a terrible card.
I mean,
You
speaking
gotta
of
play
ways to
smart.
make sure we connect to the card that you didn't seem to care as much for as the general community, ten's
Oh
a
gosh.
good way to connect.
See, no, it's not. Well, all right. Let me clarify. 10 is a great way to connect if you can cast it. Yeah. So
Oh my god, now you want
I
us
made
to
a
actually be able to cast our cards?
yeah.
We have to connect
Uncool.
and we have to cast them? This is ridiculous.
Yeah.
This deck's too
Deck's
complicated.
hard, Pheano.
This deck's
Deck
way too
hard.
complicated.
This is why no one plays this deck. No one plays this deck because this deck's too hard. But yeah, I made a bunch of waves in the Dash.io community because most other people are very high on maximum velocity. It's a real flashy card and it does do a lot of damage. The problem I always had with maximum velocity, and I will asterisk this, a lot of things change with the new Dio deck. We're gonna put a pin in those. We're coming back to it. There's a reason this card is in this list. We'll talk about that later. But prior to the Dash.io Armory deck, Maximum Velocity was not a card that I ever ran, except in exactly Prism, because 10's a really big popper.
It was
Um,
pretty cringe.
yeah. The biggest problem I have with Max Velocity is, we mentioned at kind of the start of this that when you're playing this deck, you want to be able to hit with grenades, and any card that's not hitting with grenades really needs a justification to exist. And maximum velocity, while yes, maximum velocity can connect with a grenade if it lines up, it is very awkward to line up maximum velocity in a deck that is trying to hit with grenades. Maximum velocity is a very powerful card on its own, and there are plenty of, dash IE decks that get a lot of success out of maximum velocity. But the things that you want in a deck that is trying to connect with boom grenades and the things that you want in a deck that is trying to play maximum velocity are very different things. Maximum velocity wants a lot of very cheap attacks. It wants a lot of 0-for-3s and a lot of and more blues. And notably, you want like 0-cost blues, which tend to be like ones. And those 0-for-3s are not good for connecting with grenades. We talked about wanting to put your opponent in these positions with these very awkward breakpoints. If you go play a grenade 0-for-3, 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 there are very few opponents in this game that are just going to be like, well, can't do anything about that. No, they're going to give you 3 cards and laugh at your grenade and then continue to kill you. And then like on the flip side, if you're playing a deck that wants to play this max velocity, and you're putting a bunch of items in your deck that do not say boost on them, uh, you're making your maximum velocities less consistent. You
Was it
know,
kind of
you
like a
can draw.
Runeblade hand thing where like your hand textures can get kind of awkward where it's like I need pitch, I need 3 boosts, and I need a max V. So if there's an item
Yeah,
anywhere in here, it's kind of like this doesn't actually work anymore.
yeah, exactly. Like you can draw a hand all day long that is blue pitch, boost, red boom grenade, max V and arsenal. That hand is never doing anything. Like that hand does not have enough pressure to connect with that boom grenade. That hand does not have enough boost cards to cast that maximum velocity. Like that hand is gonna be block with max V, send 2 boost attacks, pass. The two just want to pull your deck in very different directions. And I, for the longest time, have been very adamant that like I don't think the max velocity decks and the boom grenade decks are the same deck. I think you can play a max velocity deck, or you can play a boom grenade deck, but like at least prior to the Dio deck, I don't think they're the same. I think you really want to pick one or the other and stick to that plan. And like we mentioned, boom grenade is just the most powerful thing you can be doing in this hero. So like personally, I feel like the maximum velocity plan is just kind of strictly worse. I'm
Okay.
gonna make a whole lot of your viewers mad by that, but I just was never a fan of the maximum velocity builds. I think that was the reason that we saw the deck languish for so long, was because people were very focused on the big like Toma Fiendal max velocity high roll kind of decks instead of just do the powerful thing. You know, I
Personally,
don't think I don't think the hero needs to get these high roll spike turns when you're capable of this just very consistent, wildly above rate thing every turn.
not that anyone's here for my opinion on Dash IO, but I think I definitely agreed. We talked about this at a couple events, just
Hmm.
like after event stuff. Uh, I think I agreed with your logic at those particular things where it's like given the metagame, given the texture of the cards that you had access to in your deck at the time, I think I agree with that because like if you're able to win games without it and do your thing without it and connect with your win grenades without it, it's kind of a win more card in a lot of instances. Like you just didn't need it to do the thing. It's adding a consistency issue to the deck.
Yeah, I agree.
Given the
I
current new cards that we're getting access to, I think it's a quite a bit easier to get off because you can just create these situations of like I'm I have like a 7 card hand this turn. It doesn't matter. I'm connecting with this shit. Like
Yeah,
I I have 4 boost cards this turn plus items. Like I just have so much going on in my hand, and
yeah,
now I can just convert.
yeah. Also, we'll get into heavy industry power plant, which I think, despite the fact that Cerebellum processor is as powerful as it is, this might be my favorite of the new cards.
This card's messed
Um,
up.
this
I
card
mean,
is real
let
messed up. Oh, one other thing I will just mention on the Max V versus Boom Grenade turn, we get Soup Up, and Soup Up is one of my favorite cards because you'll notice it is a 0 cost 4 with Go Again.
that's
Uh,
crazy.
I, I like 0 cost 4s with Go Again. Uh,
Why are you playing this instead
Soup
of
Up.
Aurora?
What?
Why are you playing this instead of Aurora? You got way more 0 for 4s.
Oh, do you want me to pull up my Aurora deck? I can go get
Oh
my Aurora
man.
deck. I'm definitely playing Aurora too. I fell in love with that hero.
I guess
But
I can
that
go
deck,
ahead and
that deck's
delete. I can just go ahead and delete my interview with Bartosz and just run it with you instead.
yeah, really. No, yeah. If anyone has not watched Bartosz's Aurora video, go watch that. It was excellent. I love that hero so much too right now.
But yeah, this
Dio's
importantly
about to
doesn't
take
have
over.
the funny word, does it?
No, doesn't. And this is just another one of those things where we're talking about like these two decks being very opposed to each other. Having a 0 for 4 with Go Again is incredibly powerful with boom grenades. Also, this triggers if it hits its own boom grenade. If you play a boom grenade and you play a soup up, the soup up gets Go Again from its own boom grenade, which is awesome. But again, this card doesn't have boost. So like if you draw that hand that's a blue, 2 boost cards, and a soup up and have a max V, well that hand still doesn't cast max V. Uh,
Mhm.
but if that's a blue, 2 4s, and a soup up and a boom grenade, that hand is excellent. Soup also really good with backup protocol. Backup protocol also turns on soup up, so you can backup protocol for soup up very easily.
Alright, let's jump
Um,
into the new cards. I'm just gonna briefly go over them, and then we can start talking about them one at a time. So for the armor, We have the headpiece. When it defends, you can banish the top card of your deck. If it's a mech card, this gets +1 until end of turn, and then it has temper. So if you do this, it'll be temper 2, and then it'll be temper 1, so you get 3 defense out of this while also getting to sculpt the top of your deck to dig. You've got Heavy Industry Power Plant, temper 2 again, but this has action. You can pay 1 resource, destroy it, and then whenever you boost this turn, you gain 1 resource. Go again. We've got the gloves, which we just saw like yesterday.
Yeah.
Again, temper 1, and then when this defends, you can pay 1 resource. If you do, it gets +1 until end of turn. So again, we've got the goes to temper 2, then to temper 1. We've got heavy industry gear shift. This one is battle worn, not temper. Action, you can destroy this, banish the top 2 cards of your deck, gain 1 action point for each mech card banished this way. So this does not have go again when you do it, though. So you'll go from 1 action point to 2 action points. So you're just +1 action point by cracking this. Fast and Furious, it is a 0 cost red, 3 power, 3 defense attack. It has boost, and if you've cranked this turn, it gets +1, so it turns from a 0 for 3 to 0 for 4. And then if this is banished from boosting, so if this is the card on top of your deck and it gets banished off of boost, you can put a steam counter on an item you control with crank. And then we've got Tome at Home, Cerebellum Processor. What's with these messed up blues they keep giving us? It
Yeah,
is
this card's real good.
it's one of the cards of all time for sure. It's a blue 0 cost item. It does not defend. It has crank, and it enters the arena with 2 steam counters on it. So if you crank it, it'll go to 1 steam counter. And once per turn action, you can pay 0 to draw a card that uses your action point to draw that card.
We can talk about processor first. This is gonna be probably the deepest of the discussions. This is a messed up card. All right, do you want to move on to everything else?
Video's done.
No. Yeah, that's it. All right. What do you think of the new card? Cerebellum Processor is a messed up card. All right, that was good times. Actually, what's really funny is I think Cerebellum Processor is actually not a messed up card. I think High Octane is a messed up card, and it's funny. They literally, like, if anyone has not seen the new dev diary, they were talking about that High Octane is probably one of the most powerful cards left in the game now that the tomes are gone, and I think I completely agree. Uh, I'm a this is me coming to you as the local -io main. Please ban High Octane. This is messed up. So yeah, so Cerebellum Processor. It is a 0 cost blue item with crank. Notably, it is the only item in the game that starts with 2 steam counters on crank, which means if you do not crank, you'll get to keep this for 2 additional turns, or if you crank it, you'll get it on the turn you play it, you'll gain the action point back, and then you'll get to draw an additional card on your next turn following. You are probably going to be cranking this, I'd say 80 to 90% of the time, because being able to crank it just refunds the card you spent. You can play this, crank this, draw a card pretty immediately. Your one of your most common lines, if you're not playing this from the top, is you're going to end your turn with it, to where you can spend your whole hand, end on a Cerebellum Processor, and then just immediately get that card back to Arsenal to just set up another 5-card hand. Once it is down, you can, at the absolute, like, your floor for this card now is you've played it, you've refreshed that card, you've set up a 5-card hand. You're going to send a 5-card hand, then you're going to go to the end of your turn, and then you're going to spend that last action point to draw another card to Arsenal and send another 5-card hand. One of the things that we talked about in this deck is making sure that you're hitting with those boom grenades every turn, to make sure that every hand can connect with boom grenades, because you don't get to decide when the grenades show up. You don't really get a lot of say in, like, oh well, I'll wait to take my boom grenade turn, next turn when I've got a better hand. If you draw a hand with just 4 blues and no Arsenal, and you find that boom grenade on top, you've got to figure out how to make that work. And so I think one of the biggest real things with Dio is knowing when to stop attacking, just to make sure that you can set up another turn for next turn. Something that you'll see me do a lot if I'm playing the deck is play on my attacks. Once I find my grenade, I will keep attacking until I connect with that grenade. Once the grenade has connected for a turn, I am no longer looking to push damage on this turn. I'm looking to go, okay, what is the best way to set up my next turn to make sure that I can connect with another grenade next turn? And that usually means not attacking with whatever the last card is in my hand. If I hit a grenade and I've still got an attack in my hand, I am almost always looking to arsenal that card, because the difference in a 4-card hand with a grenade and a 5-card hand with a grenade is night and day.
Now, what about a
So
5-card hand and a
Cerebellum
6-card hand, because we have the Cerebellum?
So the Cerebellum processor, before we start getting into additional action points, will basically just ensure you having 5-card hands. It means you're going to play out your whole hand, you're going to activate the Cerebellum processor to spend your 1 action point, and then you're going to be able to draw a card and then arsenal that card. That is the floor of this. That is like the baseline, assuming we have no other interaction and no other ways to abuse action points.
The
Which,
fairest
don't
way
worry,
we could play this card.
yeah, that is the fairest way we can play this card. Says I'm gonna get 2 5-card hands in a row.
The
In a
fairest is
deck,
it's multiple ponder tokens, basically.
yeah, it's basically 2 ponder tokens. Like, that is the fairest way you play this card, is that it is 2 ponder tokens, which is exceedingly powerful already. Like, just the ability to, like, the difference in a 4-card dash IO hand and a 5-card dash IO hand is kind of night and day, because we're so hinged on those grenades. Finding a grenade on a 4-card hand, there is a reasonable chance that your opponent might be able to block that out. And if they can block that out, you just lost all the value on that grenade. 5-card dash IO hands are a lot harder to block out. If I can go pitch 1 card 4-4-4-4, there are very few heroes in the game that can reliably stop 4 4-power attacks back to back. It's just very, very difficult to do. And it increases the consistency at which you can connect with those grenades astronomically. And that's our floor. That's where we're starting. That's the absolute baseline for what this card is capable
Level 1
of.
of the iceberg. Let's go deeper.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's level 1 of the iceberg here, is just raw consistency. I am going to spend 1 card to guarantee that my next 2 grenades are almost assuredly going to hit. That's level 1. Level 2, now we have the ability also to play this card off the top of our deck. We sort of glossed over this with the grenades, but I think this is a thing worth mentioning for the people who are maybe new to the hero. When you play an item off the top of your deck with Dash IO, you're playing it as an instant. It does not consume an action point, which is where, like we talked about with the grenades being 6 value, because you're gaining an action point if you crank, because just like with the spark, if you put this into play, even if you didn't play it from hand, you can crank it and gain an action point. So when we crank an item off the top of our deck, we are not spending an action point, but we are still gaining an action point. Playing a Cerebellum processor off of the top of our deck, now we have this card in play that did not cost us a card to play, but gained us an action point that we can then put back into the processor to draw another card. So now we have turned Dash's hero power into pay 1 resource, draw a card, which is wild. Like, there's no world where you could print a hero whose hero power was once per turn, pay a resource, draw a card. That's obscene. And Cerebellum Processor does that for Dash IO. It turns her into just a straight up 5 intellect hero on the turns that you can find a Cerebellum Processor on the top of your deck. And that's discounting the fact that it will still also hang around for that next turn to get that other ponder token. You know, again, we're back to like that level 1 floor of, I am still next turn going to be sending a 5-card hand at you, but also on this turn I just gained an intellect, and that's wild. We also have the ability to spark for this card. You know, we talked about all of our different Spark of Genius lines, and how sometimes when you just had kind of a mid turn, you could spark for that backup protocol to kind of turn a mid turn into like a very reasonable turn. Now we have the ability to also spark for the Cerebellum processor.
It's just literally
And
pot of greed
if,
now.
yeah, we do need it. So we do need an extra action point from somewhere else to make this line work, because again, the spark itself doesn't have go again. We can crank the processor to get that extra action point from the spark, but we'll still need an extra action point. We can either use it like we used it on our level 1, where we're going to spark for this and then have our ponder tokens, but because the spark draws a card, that's a little less good. But thankfully we have other ways to generate action points too. If like we mentioned, if we've played a boom grenade off the top of our deck, we can gain an action point, you know? And then we have high octane. We will come back to high octane. It's its own kind of monster. We will also we'll mention later the new boots are another good way to get an action point, or Achilles accelerator, which is one of our previous sets of boots that are also very good at getting an extra action point. So now, if we have any other way to gain an action point, we can turn that Spark of Genius into just Pot of Greed. That then also again will get us an extra card on our following turn. So it's more than Pot of Genius. It's Ancestral Recall. Spark of Genius. If we have an extra action point that we can gain from somewhere else, we can turn Spark of Genius into Ancestral Recall. Drawing 3 cards in this game is not a great thing for game balance. uh,
Instead of the great book
we just
burning,
talked.
it should have been the great book smelting. Needed to melt these cards down.
Processor's a hell of a drug. And then we have high octane. High octane already, we kind of talked about how previously high octane was gonna be was kind of this very strong card, particularly into like our fatigue matchups, but was like kind of less interesting in our aggro matchups. We could generate a whole bunch of action points and then not actually have that many things to do with them.
Yeah, because we might not have enough counters on the gun at that point.
Yeah, because generally with the aggro matchups, you're not really trying to stock up. You're not trying to take as many setup turns. You're not trying to really stock up gun counters. You're just kind of sending the gun every chance you get. Now, because we have this Cerebellum processor, now suddenly we have a lot more things to do with those action points.
I've seen some disgusting high octane plays with this.
I have performed some disgusting high octane, and the thing that makes it even worse is that Cerebellum processor is this like self-fulfilling thing on a high octane turn where you can play a boost card, gain an action point, then use that action point on the Cerebellum processor to draw a card, which then is another boost card, which you then play and regain the action point. So Cerebellum processor on a high octane turn not only is just this extra card value, we've now removed the only cost to it. The only thing that's really kind of desperately trying to hold Cerebellum processor in check is the fact that it does cost an action point. And those action points have a lot of value in this deck. High Octane throws that right out the window. High Octane just says, if there is a Cerebellum processor in play, you just get an extra card. It doesn't really cost you an extra action point. It doesn't really cost you anything. High Octane just says, draw an extra card for free. And that's kind of crazy. And just like the fact that the Cerebellum processors just do like stick around for 2 turns just gives you even more of that window to set up these high octane Cerebellum processor turns. Also worth noting that Fast and Furious, the other new card that we kind of briefly mentioned, when you banish this from boosting, you can put a steam counter on an item with Crank. That includes the Cerebellum processor, which just gives you another full turn of Cerebellum processor.
So this just turns into, if this is boosted, draw a card.
Yeah. It's going to be,
okay.
when this is boosted, draw a card 2 turns from now, but like, still
okay.
fine. That's
remember when we were like, oh man, when this is boosted, put a counter back on your hyperdriver. Wow, that's so good. Get 1 extra resource later. Okay, but what about draw an entire card instead?
Yeah, like it's wild. And just the number of things that you can do with this thing are kind of cracked.
I think the most I've seen so far was a nutty turn where it was like 50 plus damage or something like that. I think it was like all 3 Cerebellums in play, high octane twin drive, crack 2 of them, draw 2 more cards, do a couple more things, max V, pick up max V with Protocol Red, max V again, and it was just like, what is this game?
Yeah,
deceased target opponent.
I literally had a game. So we talked briefly about max V and how difficult it is to get max V turns going on a list that really wants to play boom grenades.
A little less hard when you draw like 6 cards or something like that.
Yeah, like when you're reliably throwing these like 5 and 6 card hands, that card gets a lot easier to cast. I literally had I had one of my test games this weekend. I was playing against an Enigma, and they're just like fatigue you, fatigue you, fatigue you, fatigue you. And I got to a point where I had 2 Cerebellum processors in play towards the end of the game, and a high octane, and I only had about 8 cards left in my deck, and I knew what 4 of them were. I knew like the bottom 4 from just pitch stack, and I was just like, There's a max V in here somewhere. You're dead. I'm just gonna keep boosting until I find the max V, draw the max V, and then kill you.
That reminds me, I gotta put this back in my deck.
Wait, which card is that? I can't see.
Hold the line.
Oh yeah, yeah. We had like 2 weeks where Hold the Line was not that great anymore. Yeah, we're gonna change that. Hold the Line is real good in this deck now. Which is really sad to me because I actually loved, when I was playing this deck previously, and all the other Dash-O were on the Max V plus Toma Fiendal thing. Everyone would bring Balance of Justice and Hold the Line in against me, and I'm just like, nice 2 block idiot.
Dumb
Because like
dumb.
my my build was particularly good at playing around it because like I had Spark and High Octane, and it's just as long as you didn't Spark
Overlap.
and High Octane on the same turn, you could just kind of play around their Balance of Justice the whole game, and their hold lines were just these 2 blocks that did nothing. And in a deck there, you really need as many 4 blocks as possible. Having 2 blocks was real funny.
Yeah. A little
So
harder
I
to
got a
spread
lot
it
of
out
games.
with like the play pattern of this though, because you're
Oh
like
yeah, it's
really
almost
heavily
impossible now.
incentivized to high octane to get value out of these. And if you're not high octane to get value out of them, then I think your opponent's happy anyways. But then because you're
Yeah.
drawing a card off the high octane and then you're drawing a card off of this, it just immediately
Mhm.
turns them all on.
Oh yeah. It's nearly impossible to play around it now. Between High Octane and Spark of Genius and the Cerebellum processors, the number of cards that you're drawing in a turn is just really huge now. And even the fact that like we were calling Cerebellum processors Ponder tokens at their level 1, they're not actually Ponder tokens at level 1 because you have to do them during your action phase. So like if you had a turn that was just like, oh, play a Spark for a backup protocol, or even just like if you play a Spark for a Cerebellum processor, and then you plan on just like using the Cerebellum processor to just get that Ponder token, you've now just drawn 2 cards. Like
Mm-hmm.
your opponent still has a window to respond to that because it's not actually a Ponder. It is an action during your main phase, and you've now drawn from the Spark and then drawn from the Cerebellum processor. So if your opponent is on like that Balance of Justice, they now have a window to get that free card draw. And that is something that's very relevant now. Like any of the like anti card draw cards like that are going to be very relevant to this matchup again, which is kind of sad, but I mean, it's at the cost of being really, really powerful.
Man, my deck can shit out 50 damage in one turn, and my opponent's allowed to have a 0 for 5. Unbalanced.
Yeah,
Hold the
I
line.
agree. Yeah, ban Hold the Line, ban Balance of Justice. Except
How
when I play it in LL. I need that card in LL. please, please don't ban it there.
So I think let's jump into the we briefly touched on it, the boots, because I think this is a really important kind of jump off point from the Cerebellum.
Sure. The boots are one that I see a lot of people not super excited about, which is really funny to me.
They're
So
busted. They're
uh,
busted.
Well, so they are very, very strong. However, we have Achilles Accelerator, which you can see is in my sideboard if you want to pull it up. Achilles Accelerator and the new boots compare very close to one another. And Achilles is kind of arguably like on paper, its text is better. It's an instant for the activation. You don't have to banish 2 cards to get the action point. You can just have it and you can use it kind of whenever you want. And there are some absolute merits to that. However,
Burning two
heavy
cards
industry.
from your deck seems like a real cost in a deck that could fatigue.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes it very much is. Like there are going to be absolute matchups that are defined by whether or not you have 2 extra cards in your deck. I have won and lost a whole lot of games on Xaxes cards in deck. So there are going to be times when being forced to burn 2 cards is very relevant. That said, there are some times when burning 2 cards can actually be a real boon to the deck. We mentioned earlier where we want to be able to find these boom grenades and play them as often as possible. And sometimes being able to just change the top card of your deck one more time in a game can be exactly what it takes to close things out. There are times where that can be very, very relevant. Also, this has this number in the bottom right hand corner, and it's a 1. And that 1 doesn't seem like a lot. Having block value on your armor, particularly in a deck that not only does not want to block, does not block particularly well. Dash.io is a hero that really does not want to be blocking ever, or very, very infrequently. I think if Dash gets to draw the perfect game, like if you're just like, what is the perfect game? That perfect game is a game where you never put a card down blocking. You want to be attacking. Like obviously you're an aggro deck. Every card in your deck is worth less blocking than it is attacking. But more importantly, because the way the deck functions, the fewer cards you attack with, one is the fewer times that you can change the top card of your deck for digging for grenades, and two is fewer opportunities to connect with those grenades even if you find them. If I had to block with 2 cards, even if I have 2 really good attacks and a pitch card, and I can find that grenade, I'm still only sending 2 cards, making it much easier for my opponent to block that grenade out. Just like we were talking about with being able to spark for a grenade. If you tell your opponent, I have a grenade, but I only have 2 cards in hand, the odds of them trying to block it out go much, much higher. You really want to, in this deck, try to get as much block value on your armor as you can, because there are going to be times that you have to block. You know, Either we're in the end of the game and my opponent is sending what could potentially be lethal, I'm going to have to block there. There are very disruptive on hits that this deck is very vulnerable to. Cards like Erase Face, I expect to start seeing a lot more of in the coming months.
Or
Even
the
like
classic from the last meta,
CNC,
Weakest Link.
yeah, like Weakest Link, CNC are all very like have a lot of very relevant text into this deck. Being able to cover as much as you can with your armor is really important. It's actually the reason that like I play Adaptive Plating, and this was a card that I didn't see a whole lot of Dash AOs playing before I started running it. A lot of them were on things like Goliath Gauntlet before that, to just really push as much damage as you can. But adaptive plating gives you this very clean adaptive plating plus heavy industry gear shift plus Teklo Foundry Heart is 6. That clean covers any of those 3 cards we just talked about. We talked about the Erase Face, Weakest Link, CNC. Having just 6 armor just to go shove, I don't want to deal with this, I'm going to keep my full hand, thanks,
And the
is
adaptive works
such
so
a
perfectly with
powerful.
the Cerebellum because you like
Oh, absolutely.
every game you're going to resolve these, and you're always going to
Mhm.
end up at some point with one in play afterwards that just okay, this has no function anymore, but it's still technically in play. So I just have this like half turn where it's in play that I could sack it to my adaptive plating because there's no way to actually get a counter back on it anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just very free. There was a point in time where I was actually running 2 adaptive platings in both arms and legs in some of my previous iterations, just kind of for that exact reason. Not with Cerebellum processor, but with penetration scripts, which I was running in some of the previous versions of the deck, where you could kind of do the same thing, where you could play your card, get your value out of it, and then just kind of chuck it into the adaptive plating and just get just a ton of extra block value. I think Heavy Industry Gear Shift does enough for this deck that I am probably going to stay on this over the second adaptive plating. But I think there's absolutely a world where like we just play 2 adaptive platings again, just like to try and counter these decks that are going to bring in a lot of disruptive on hits, and just
Well,
you
you,
just want
you
to be able to block.
You were also talking about like the top deck manipulation that this gives you because of digging for boom grenades, but it does the other
Mhm,
thing too, where like the key card that we're trying to put into play is the processor.
mhm.
Top of deck
Yeah.
manipulation, great with processor, where you can be like, okay, I want to, I plan on using this turn. I'm definitely gonna crack this at some point here. I think I want to boost this card off the top of my deck. It's still a bad card on top of my deck. Okay, I'll crack this now to get rid of this card to get another look. Okay, I hit a red off the top of my deck. I want to draw this card now while I'll crack my processor, and this is actually what I want in my hand right now.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think that's something else that I think we probably didn't touch on, but is an additional like piece of the Cerebellum processor, little like iceberg, is because Dasho can always know the top card of her deck. Drawing a card in this hero is so much more powerful than drawing a card in 95% of other decks. This is something that I always tried to explain to people when I was playing cards like Snatch in Dromai. Snatch is a card that's always been like very fine into a lot of things. Like it's been around since Welcome to Race, and it's been a good card, and some aggro decks have played it here and there. But like Snatch has never felt oppressive, because just a random card off of the top of your deck sometimes can be great. Sometimes you draw that blue that you never really wanted and does kind of nothing and gets kind of poopy value. But like in a deck like Dromai, where you were entirely redline, that card draw was 100% going to be a scary card all the time. And Dash.io gets to do the same thing because she knows what the top of her deck is and she has so many ways to manipulate it. She can just sit here and go, okay, well, I didn't like that one. Okay, I didn't like that one. Ooh, there's a good one. It's like I mentioned earlier. I literally had a game where I was just like, there's a max velocity in my deck somewhere. I'm gonna just boost until I find it and then kill you. So that card draw is worth substantially more in Dash.io than it is in almost any other hero in the deck. And for exactly that reason, because we have those cards like Heavy Industry Gear Shift, where you have these extra ways to manipulate the top of your deck to make sure that the card you're drawing is always powerful. And that is just exceptionally above rate.
Yeah, like the way I would you're talking about that a second ago, Snatch. The way I always try describing it to newer players trying to figure these things out is with E-Strike. Do you think your deck is good with E-Strike draw a card? Would you take any random card in your deck and put it in your arsenal? Are there cards in your deck that you would be actively upset putting in your arsenal right now? And then that can kind of be like how Snatch is in these decks too. Like, hey, are you fine with random Snatch draws? Well, Dromai, everything was a good arsenal, so Snatch was great.
Not Big Dragon. Big Dragon definitely had a couple. I mean, it was mostly fine for Big Dragon, but like Big Dragon had a couple of those blues that were a little chunky.
Sure.
Yeah. But yeah, like Redline Dromai, absolutely, and especially like in a post-tome world, just the Snatch draws were always terrifying. Like Snatch was a must block all the time, just because you could just guarantee that like no matter what I draw, this is
Also,
going to be powerful.
when did you say you started Everfest?
Just before Everfest, yeah.
So you don't know the terror of Snatch in Lightning Ball Briar back then?
I
That's
literally
oppressive.
started.
That was oppressive.
Yeah. The day I learned how to play Fab, literally the day that I was being taught, it was a couple of members of our local community. Shout out to TT Bo, who was the one that actually like taught me how to play the game. Somebody else came over and was like, "Hey, Ball Lightning finally got banned." Like I have a vivid memory of that. And I was like, "What's that card do?" And they showed it to me. I'm like, "This card's fucked up." And they're like, "Yeah, it's banned now." So yeah, I literally missed the terror of Ball Lightning by like a day. Like the day I learned how to play Fab was the day that Ball Lightning was banned.
Do you have anything else that you actually want to say about Fast and Furious?
Fast and Furious is just a very, very solid glue piece. It's one of the other pieces that I think that I'm just very excited to have. Being, we talked about how powerful 0-for-4s are for this deck. Fast and Furious also, it's really cool the way the card is designed. It ticks all of the boxes for all the different versions of the deck. Like I said, with the grenade builds where like you just really want these 4s on your break points. So like this card, when you've cranked, which is like when you've played a boom grenade, it's another 0-for-4. Like it's 0 cost 4, great for hitting those boom grenade breakpoints. But then we talked about how the max velocity versions of the deck really want those 0 cost attacks that are a lot cheaper and just easier just to get boosts going. And this also satisfies that. Even if you haven't cranked, this is a 0 cost boost attack, which makes the max velocities easier to get off. And with us going into cerebellum processors and wanting to keep these cerebellum processors as long as possible, that last line of text that lets you just put a steam counter on a cerebellum processor, like we talked about earlier, just says draw a card on it. So yeah, Fast and Furious, I think, is one of the sleeper most powerful cards in this Armory deck, just because of the way that it sort of glues everything together. It makes the grenades more consistent, it makes the max fees more consistent, it makes the cerebellum processor plan stronger. Fast and Furious just does everything I could possibly want in a boost card, and it is absolutely excellent.
I've also seen some cute plays with it too, where you like have booms in play and your opponent, as one does, starts blocking, and then you end up boosting the Fast and Furious near the end of the chain, putting the counter back on the boom, and then they're just like,
Oh, it's absolutely.
well, if I
Yeah, oh,
knew
absolutely.
if I knew that was gonna happen, I would have just let it go through. But now I had to fight over it again. But I already spent all my armor this turn, so this is just gonna
Yeah,
happen
100%.
anyways. Oh my god!
Yeah,
And you're like, yep,
yeah.
clown.
We talked very briefly early about that like mind game of making your opponent decide if they think they can commit the resources to covering a boom grenade to try to block it out. And like I said, yeah, if they go, all right, I'm all in, I'm gonna commit my armor, I'm gonna commit that sync blow that I've had in Arsenal, I'm gonna commit everything to stop this grenade, and then you just boost a Fast and Furious, and you're just like, nice deck 5 head.
Table flip.
Uh, and then you're just gonna do it all over the next turn. Except now they're down all that armor, they're down that sink below, and now they've spent all of these resources and are probably still gonna get hit by that grenade. I love Fast and Furious. Fast and Furious just does so many things for the deck. It's wonderful. So the head is actually really interesting. At its floor, we kind of talked about it is a temper 2 headpiece. It is effectively 3-block headpiece that also lets us again kind of manipulate that top card of our deck again. Does have some very real costs if you're looking at playing into matchups where the fatigue is relevant, because taking 4 cards out of your deck is quite a bit. But again, in these aggro matchups where all you really want to do is be able to block a ton, and you're not really worried about fatiguing, this can get a lot of value. This, however, has an extra little secret mode, and it's something I'm almost sad that it's not in the deck right now. But when this first got spoiled, I was very, very excited to play this because we were still in the Zen meta. This was before the Great Book burning happened, and before Zen got kind of toileted. Heavy industry surveillance. You'll notice the block value persists for the entire turn. So if you can ever block with this card and then get your opponent to break the combat chain, you can block with it again and re-trigger this. So you can do things like you can block, mill your 2 cards, it goes to 2 block, then they close the chain, it'll get the temper counter on it, and it goes down to 1 block, but still has that +1. So it's at 1, or it's at 2 block with 1 negative counter on it. Then they attack again, you can block with it again and re-trigger it, taking it to 3 block with a counter on it, so it effectively can block for another 2. So if your opponent ever just like, if you're playing against an opponent who's just like breaking the chain very frequently, you can get a lot of block value out of this.
So pairing
Something that
this
I
with
was
like
very
Stonewall or something.
exactly, it's 100%. That was what I was gonna say is back in the Zen meta, I was running Stonewall Gauntlet as just my baseline into everybody, just because it was a very easy to get 2 block that then also sometimes into Zen could just block for like 7. Um, so I was running, like I told you, I was previously running 2 adaptive platings. When Stonewall came out, I switched to 1 adaptive plating and a Stonewall Gauntlet because getting just 2 value was very easy. You could then combine Heavy Industry Surveillance with Stonewall Gauntlet to get a solid 6 block value out of 2 pieces of equipment, which is absolutely excellent. To be able to cash in your head and your arms and get 6 value of block is huge. So yeah, I am a little sad because the new boots came out in conjunction with Zen not being as big a part of the meta. The Stonewall Gauntlet's currently out of my list, and without the Stonewall Gauntlet, the Heavy Industry Surveillance loses a little bit of that value, gumming up anything. Card of Providence just does a lot of work, and so it's kind of tough to give that up. So yeah, the Heavy Industry Surveillance doesn't quite make the cut in my current list, but I think is an excellent budget alternative. And I think there are going to be very real worlds where, we get into aggro metas where we just really need to block a ton and we don't want to block from hand. And getting that extra 3 block plus the ability to dig for grenades will make this an excellent sideboard piece for aggro matchups.
So like keep it in the back pocket. Like keep it in mind.
Yeah.
Like it could have its place again. Like this probably would have been good versus Chain back in the day. Just they break
Oh,
Chain a lot.
absolutely.
You might
Yeah,
even be able to get
absolutely.
an additional block out of it, right? Or would it break
Yeah.
at that point?
No.
No, it would
So
never go
it
to
will.
0.
It will never go to 0 until the end of your turn.
So like there's a world
And
where you
then
get 3
I'm using.
blocks.
Yeah. There's absolutely one, and they're always 2, because it'll go to a 2 block armor with 1 temper, then a 3 block armor with 2 temper. It goes to 2 temper after the block. It'll be a 2 block armor with no temper, and then puts a counter on it. Then a 3 block with 1 that puts a counter on it, and then a 4 block with 2 that puts a counter on it. So yeah, if your opponent is constantly breaking the chain, you can the first turn you activate this, it will pretty much always continue blocking for 2 every time. So yeah, it is absolutely a very well designed card. It's probably not in the main deck right now, but is certainly a card that I am going to keep in consideration, and is an excellent budget alternative too. Like if you're looking at playing this hero for the first time and you're just like, I don't want to buy a Crown of Providence, Heavy Industry Surveillance is an excellent choice and is going to be a wonderful addition to Dash.io's arsenal.
What do you think about this one? I haven't put much thought into this one yet.
This one I'm slightly less excited about. I think this is the one, like, kind of the weakest piece. However, it still does have some uses. Like I say, we're right now probably just running adaptive plating in that slot, which is just a very clean 3 block. And this is kind of potentially temper 2, so like you can get 3 points of block value out of this just over 2 turns, but you do have to pay the resource for it. The nice little perk on this one is Dashio's hero ability, you will see, generally gets used on your own turn, but can be used on either player's turn. You can absolutely use that Dash.io ability on your opponent's turn. The problem is typically when you're using it on your opponent's turn, you don't have anything else to do with those extra resources. So if you play an item off the top, you just kind of spent a whole card to gain a card. You don't really get the action point because you can't crank, or like you can crank, but it doesn't do anything because you can't gain an action point on your opponent's turn. Playing items on your opponent's turn, while can be relevant, is usually not great. And Heavy Industry Ramstop does give you this extra little incentive where if you're playing items on your opponent's turn, you now have an extra little outlet for those extra resources.
Yeah, it seems like it could
So
be
yeah,
good if you're playing some of the one-cost items or something. Maybe in a more, like,
yeah,
I've seen in the past people play some of the defensive items. So, like, maybe there's a
yeah,
spot where you do it with that.
yeah. And like I said, like it is still just like a reasonable defensive option. I suspect that adaptive plating is probably just gonna kind of do what this wants to do a little bit better right now. Still, like I say, very reasonable budget alternative. But probably the weakest of the set right now, I think. Probably the one that is least likely to see real competitive play.
Does seem
Um,
like it might be decent in Tree Frog Dash.
Possibly, although a lot of the Tree Frog dashes I think are on the Evo gloves.
Makes sense.
I think. I haven't looked at Tree Frog Dash's list in a while, but I know for a while they were on the Evo gloves. But just having that extra block value can get a long way. And so like it's possible that those kind of decks want that over the Evo gloves now.
And
3
then
block on gloves is still just really good.
lastly, Chess Piece. This does some mess up stuff.
I love this card. This card, I think more than any other of the cards we talked about, I mentioned earlier how I've never really been a fan of max velocity in the boom grenade kind of lists. And Cerebellum Processor does a lot to make max velocity playable in those lists. However, you still need things to line up correctly for that to really work. Like you need to be able to have the processor already down. You need to have another source of action points so you can draw the card on the Cerebellum Processor, and then you still need to be able to find the boost cards to kind of make it all happen. Which means like there are still going to be times where if you're just leaning on Cerebellum Processor to play the max velocities, you're still going to have some number of hands that just don't cast max velocity. Heavy Industry Power Plant kind of entirely changes that. Heavy Industry Power Plant is a piece of equipment that just starts in play, stays in play, and says once per game, I get to play a max velocity on almost any hand. Literally, if I have 3 boost cards and a max velocity, it it almost doesn't even matter what those 3 boost cards are. If I have a 5-card hand and 3 of them have the word boost on them and one of them is max velocity, I am probably casting that max velocity right now.
So long as you can play those 3 boost cards,
Right.
you're playing the
Yeah,
max
like
V.
yeah, it just makes it so consistent. Like I said, and because we talked about like the max V decks really want those 0 cost boosts because you were so strapped for resources on turns where you wanted to send the max velocity. Like you almost always needed either like 3 0 cost blues or three 0 cost boosts, or you needed a Teklo core to be able to reliably get all the resources you need to send those and still be able to cast the max V, because max V does cost 2, which is part of why like in the grenade list you're running a bunch of 1-for-4s, and if you don't have a core, having 1-for-4 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 max V is never gonna work. Like that math is never lining up on a normal list. But because power plant just exists, 1-for-4 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 max V is just clean. Not only is that 1-for-4 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 max V also just lets you still have the resources to play a grenade.
You're dollar short, right?
Yeah,
So that
right
could be
hand.
one of
No.
them has to be a 0 because if you're
Yeah,
cracking
sorry, yeah.
chest,
If you have a 0, yeah, because it does cost the 1.
yeah, if
You're
you're
right.
cracking chest, it's your boost cards can cost up to 2 resources, assuming there's nothing else, right?
Right. Yeah, sorry. You're correct. Yeah, you need
Because you got to
if
pay the
if
dollar
one
to
of
do
them is a
this.
0. Yeah, if one of them is a 0, you have enough to spend the whole thing and still play a grenade off the top.
Or you can go 2-0-0, 1-1-0.
Yeah, it makes Max V scary consistent in a deck who previously couldn't have access to Max V, or at least could not have access to consistent Max Vs.
Or
This
you
I
have
think
a
is like say the
fourth,
other
or
piece.
you have a 4th boost card then you get an extra dollar. So then
Sure. Yeah, like I say, like
that, but
there's a ton of configurations now. Like that's really the point it comes down to is that you can now reliably play that max fee without having these very specific orchestrated hands. Because like that was the biggest problem previously with max fee is we talked about your deck is going to tell you when it's time to play grenades, and max v in the previous builds, when you drew a max v, it was almost always now is not the time to play a grenade. If you had a max v in hand, you're now okay. I need to arsenal this max v, so I need to set up for my max v turn. I need to like try to find a core so I can have the resources for it. I can't commit a lot to really attacking this turn because I need to set up this max v. So like if you ever had a turn that had a max v in hand and a red boom grenade off the top, you were just your deck felt like it was fighting itself, where like you were just never quite able to line everything up. But heavy industry power plant substantially changes that. Now, if I have a hand with a grenade on top and a max v in hand, I can look at that hand and go, I can probably just do both of these things. Like the chances that I can just do both of these is incredible. And, like we said kind of at the top of this, 10 is a real good way to hit with a grenade. If you can reliably play a grenade and a maxi in the same turn, you're probably connecting with that grenade.
I don't know many decks that can stop a grenade from hitting after 3 boosts and then 10.
Yeah.
It's pretty
Um,
hard.
yeah. So like I think this card almost does as much for the deck as Cerebellum Processor, just because of the raw power we gain by gaining access to the one Dash IO power card that we previously didn't really have good access to. We talked about earlier that High Octane, Spark of Genius, and Max Velocity were like the three really big power cards, and I always felt like the only thing really holding this version of the deck back even a little was the fact that we couldn't reliably also play Max V, and that changes now. Max V, also worth mentioning, is very, very good into fatigue matchups, which are one of the decks that really want to prey on this deck because this deck is very susceptible to fatigue. If they can reliably block out those grenades, you're going to run out of deck quickly. That was, I think, the one thing that the old Tome Max V lists did better than the just Rainbow Boom Grenade list was that I think they always had a slightly better edge into the fatigue matchups because you could set up these really big max velocity turns and just push a ton of damage that doesn't care if they're blocking you out or not. Now we get to play the full Rainbow Grenade list and still also play these max Vs. And
So
I see you're pulling up Teklo Foundry
yeah, I see that you're
Heart.
still playing both chess pieces though. So what's the when are we playing one versus the other? Are you undecided on that and just still experimenting with the card, or
So I will admit I am very back and forth on the future of Teklo Foundry Heart right now. In my like first draft iterations of this build, I had kind of figured that the Teklo or the that the new chess piece and Max V were going to be coming in specifically as that fatigue package, and that was really where we wanted because again, that's really where the Max V shine is in those fatigue games where we can't reliably hit with the grenades, and we can just kind of pivot into that Max V plan. Having tested more, I'm still not entirely sure that we may not just be on that plan into everything now. That said, Tekla Foundry Heart does some very, very powerful things in our aggro matchups. Foundry Heart has historically never been particularly good into the fatigue games because that cost of banishing the top two cards of our deck, you know, when we start doing that more than once or twice a game, like if we've activated that twice a game, we've lost an entire turn off of our fatigue plan. Like that's 4 cards, that's an entire hand that we can no longer use to try to kill our opponent before we run out of cards. So Foundry Heart into the fatigue matchups was something you just never really wanted to activate except for in case of like dire emergencies. However, in the aggro matchups, getting that one free resource can be very relevant, and that one free extra, chance to manipulate the top of our deck. We talked about this a little bit with the gear shift with the new boots. Getting that just one more chance to like, I want to see one more card out of the top of my deck every turn just increases your consistency for finding and being able to play those grenades significantly. So it's going to be a real interesting, and I'm still not sure which is going to be correct into those aggro matchups on whether it is better to have the free resource every turn and that like slight extra consistency on finding those grenades, or that ability to just send 10 once per game.
You also get access to that like theoretical one extra
Yeah,
block because you're not
yeah,
trying
absolutely.
to block with the new chest the second time you're trying to crack it. So if they're
Right.
throwing disruptive attacks at you to like try to pivot off of, that helps prevent that.
Yeah.
But that doesn't always
Um,
come up.
nah. So yeah, I'm currently still running both. I am not certain that it's going to stay that way. The new chess piece may just be so strong with the ability to just close a game with a max V that that might just be the plan. It does come at a very real cost in our aggro matchups. In our control matchups, it's pretty free. I think being able to just bring in the new chess piece along with max V just feels like the opportunity cost is almost non-existent. We're losing that 1 point of block value, and that's really it, since we really didn't want to be activating Foundry Heart in those matchups anyway.
Hmm.
So we are trading 1 point of block value for 10 damage. Good talk.
Fair
But
and reasonable
uh,
trade.
yeah, trade offer. Uh, but yeah, in the aggro matchups though, we are gaining 10 damage, but we are potentially losing a resource every turn and an extra chance at finding a grenade on every turn. And that's a lot harder to kind of math, in a game that's going to last like 4 to 6 turns. That's
It's
4 or
like
5 resources
it's like kind
plus,
of an intangible because you can't know.
yeah, it's exactly. We're looking at like probably 4 to 5 resources gained over the course of a game with it, and 1 to 2 extra like grenades that we might not have found otherwise. So if it's 4 resources and 1 grenade, and that 1 grenade is blue, then like okay, we only kind of gained like 8 value, and then if it's 6 resources and a red grenade, and maybe even we found 2 red grenades because just the way that the RNG kind of works out, then now we're miles ahead of the power plant.
This kind of goes
Um,
to a conversation that we were having prior to recording about like leaning into high roll potential. Like maybe you feel like that's the difference maker in a matchup where you're like, hey, I just need these couple extra looks to find
mhm,
something on the top of my deck, and that's the difference maker of winning this game. Versus the
yeah,
consistency of just my chest always does the thing. It always plays this max V. I just don't need
yeah.
that extra risk factor when I could just win the game with this anyways.
Yeah, but even on that side though, like if we're talking about these aggro games that are only going to last like a couple of turns, some of these very aggressive aggro matchups are very quick, especially if you're
Mhm.
talking about like Dash.io mirrors or Dash.io into like Aurora. These games are only going to last a couple of turns. If you commit to the power plant, you know the technical foundry heart is going to do the thing every turn. You're going to see an extra card every turn. You're going to gain a resource every turn. If you just don't draw a max V, then that power plant just had no text. So there's a little bit of high roll kind of on both ends, and you can be put in some really awkward positions where like we're playing we're playing an aggro matchup, and I just sent my first boost for the turn, and I've got 3 cards in hand, and yeah, I love this card.
How to
This
jump scare
this
someone
card
about the
is
mirror. This is the thing that's making me not want to play mirrors.
oh yeah, no, this card is very. I have 3 foil ones I just bought like 2 days ago because my deck is all rainbow foil.
I was seeing how
Like
messed up this deck was, and I was like, "Oh, I still have all my dash stuff, and I'll build this." And then, as I was looking through my cards to find my dash stuff, this was at the back of the pile. I looked at the pile, went, "Never mind," and put it back
yeah,
down.
no, this card is insane. It's so good. Uh, I'm not gonna lie. When you asked me to put together a list for this, I was like, should I put TikTok clocks in? I was like, nah, I'm just gonna leave that one out for now. The card's so good.
I mean, speaking of cards that you wanted to leave out, system reset.
All right. Are we are
That
we
seems like a
are
good
we are we
segue.
done? All right. I think we're done with most of the Max V chess piece, the power plant versus Foundry
Yeah,
Heart talk,
I
right?
think
I
we're
think we
done
kind of
talking about
covered
the
most
new
of it.
cards. It's do you want to talk about your sideboard anymore, and then just kind of ramble about random bullshit?
Yeah, like most of the sideboard is fairly straightforward. I'd imagine Visutronic has a B, Achilles Accelerator has a B. Vambrace is really good into decks that want to play a bunch of ward. Balance of Justice is good into decks that draw a bunch of cards. Max V we talked about. Scramble Pulse is good into decks with armor. Teklo Pounder is good into decks that are trying to fatigue you, and you really need those setup turns. Heist is also another one that's really good in the mirror. Heist is good for decks that don't want to block, because just the on hit for Heist is incredibly powerful. It's like we have one in the main, and having a second in the sideboard is great. Worth noting for Heist, Heist says any graveyard. So if you're playing in a mirror match,
You can
you now
take their
have
TikTok clock.
yeah, you can heist their TikTok clocks, and it's very funny. So yeah, Heist is an incredibly good card for the mirror, as well as any other matchups that just really don't want to block you.
Wouldn't this just be giving them an opportunity to cash their I guess you have lots of opportunities to get value on armor because of the boom grenades.
Oh yeah. Knowing when to use your armor in a Dash.io mirror is actually one of the most important skills to learn.
Because this feels like the only thing that you're actually going to fight over. Because,
Nah,
like,
boom grenades. You absolutely fight over boom grenades a lot, but like Heist is also very relevant. Like you have to be able to fight over heists, because that on hit is incredibly strong. But like you can also punish people, like we talked about, like people wanting to spark for boom grenade all the time, and you can absolutely punish the mirror if they overcommit on a grenade turn. Like I actually had a game very recently. I was playing a mirror into one of my locals, who went play a grenade from top of deck, crank it, and then also spark for another grenade. And then he's like, I have on hit 7 on board because it was a red and a yellow and only 2 cards. Because
next turn I'm
we were
coming
playing
for you.
mirror. No, he was playing. This is mid turn.
Oh.
And because he played it off the top, cranked it, and then sparked for a second one and cranked it. Because we'd been playing this mirror, and he had just kind of assumed, he was like, oh, you've not been blocking anything this whole game. We're just racing because this is how aggro decks do. Neither of us block each other. And he only had 2 cards, and I was just like, yeah, I'm going to give you a card and armor, and just dissolve that 7 value off the board, and then won that mirror because of it. So yeah, I think knowing when to be able to block in the mirror is actually very important, because it is a thing that you do have to do sometimes in the mirror. If you just throw your full hands at each other all the time, the mirror is just this like swingy, just high roll fest. It's just kind of whoever found the most grenades.
That's how a lot of the
But you can get a
aggro
lot of
mirrors
edge.
are. Like, I think the
Yeah.
skill in aggro mirrors is learning when to block and not just send it.
Yeah, absolutely. And Dasho, I think compounds that even further, just because those on hits are so powerful.
If you look
But
at,
yeah,
like, the
if you get
history of Fab, I think a lot of the people that have historically done the best of, like, you look at people like they just play aggro decks. I think the people that you've seen historically be the most consistent on aggro decks are the ones that are more willing to play their aggro deck in a mid-range fashion. Like Bartosz,
absolutely,
he plays very mid-rangey. I'm spacing. Is it Pudding? The blue pitch guy that plays
yeah,
Ninja usually. He's
yeah, that's
very
pudding.
willing to
Pudding is
block.
excellent at knowing when to block.
Dan, he's very willing
Mhm.
to play that mid-rangey cycle with his opponent. So like that's the people that I see be very inconsistent are the just head empty, no thoughts, no blocks, push my hand every turn.
Yeah, um, yeah, like I think there's a lot of memes about the aggro players just wanting to just all in, never block. But like realistically, especially in aggro mirrors, knowing when to block can be incredibly relevant and can absolutely swing games.
Hmm.
And the Dash mirror is no exception. Dash mirror actually can have a lot of skill expression because of that. You both have a lot of armor. Like, we talked about Dash has just a ton of armor, um,
Also,
and
like
has a
you said,
really
your
good
deck blocks
ability.
poorly, but like all your boost cards block 3. I understand, like you
Yeah,
got all these items, they don't block. Like not
yeah,
discrediting that, but like when you do block, they all do
mhm,
block for 3, sometimes
yeah,
4.
yeah. Oh, the number of times that I've won games off of galvanizing a soup up is chef's kiss. Like no one sees that coming. They're at 1, you have 2 cards in hand, and one's a 0 to 60, and then one's a soup up, and they're like, I'm just gonna send 4 and take your hand, and you're just like, I'll just galvanize this and kill you. Oh,
Hmm.
so good
Hmm.
every time.
Last card on the side,
Yeah,
just
this is
Runeblade.
send this one to make a Kano player cry. Uh,
Oh, true, true, true.
I actually don't like Signal Jammer into the Rune Blades. Signal Jammer lets you play 1 non-attack per turn, and the Rune Blades are a little bit better at being able to kind of sculpt their hands around it. Like, it does last for 2 turns, which is really nice and can be very disruptive. But the Rune Blades can generally kind of find they're like, okay, I only get 1 non-attack. Which one is the most important? And it's usually going to be like, gonna be the one that's kind of the most important to extend those hands and kind of make sure that everything still functions. It's not quite Warmongers in that regard. So I don't tend to like it into Runeblade. Where it really shines is Azalea and Kano. The decks that don't really get the option to just pick the best non-attack. If Azalea is just picking the best non-attack, she is sending 1 arrow for 8. And
That's
that's her
very
whole turn.
blockable.
Yeah, you are very happy to just shove the armor in front of that and just be like, all right, cool. Here's 1 card and my armor. Are you done?
I
And
would like
then
to play
with
the game this turn.
yeah, and then with Kano, you just get so much breathing room where you're like, oh, I know you're gonna try to combo kill me. Here's 2 turns where you just can't combo kill me. It's particularly funny with Kano too that you can. So if you have Achilles Accelerator, you can sack it just to gain action point. And this is where one of these situations where Achilles is really relevant.
Mhm.
If you know that like you're low life and the Kano is low, and you're really trying to set up that kill, but you're really scared that if you overcommit, Kano's just going to kill you. You can send your 1 attack, play a spark, and if the Kano doesn't respond to the spark, you can get the signal jammer, and then he can no longer respond to the signal jammer because it just comes into play as part of spark.
You
You can
can't
shut that
respond in the middle of an effect resolving.
right.
It's play the
Whereas
spark. Do you have a response? Resolve all of spark. It's put the thing into
yeah,
play. Do anything that would happen because the thing was put into play. Draw my card. Finish
yeah,
resolving the effect.
yeah. So whereas normally like if you just play the signal jammer out like at the start of your turn, that Kano is probably gonna just go, okay, in response, try to kill you. But if you do it off of the spark, if the Kano is not like really paying a lot of attention, you can get the signal. You can kind of sneak the signal jammer into play,
They also might
and
not
then
expect that because that's not a standard
yeah,
card.
yeah, absolutely. And then you're now safe to crack the Achilles Accelerator to get your action point back, and then just proceed with the rest of your turn without having fear of them just killing you if you overcommit. So I've killed a lot of Kanos that way. So that one's a pretty fun one. I like Signal Jammer a lot. It's good into Kano, and then it's also really good into Azalea.
That can also make them
Um,
feel silly because now they might be, oh, well, now I wish I blocked because I can only play one thing.
yeah,
I can't
absolutely.
use
Like
all these
particular.
cards anymore.
Yeah, like you definitely push, especially into Azalea. You kind of push them into a position where like, all right, you're just gonna block for the next 2 turns, and I'm so happy to make you block because you're never covering my grenades. Like Azalea does not block particularly well, especially with her non-attacks. Is not very capable of covering over grenades. So if you're just making her block, you're just like hemorrhaging value, and then like she's losing all her on hits, she's losing all of her real threat. Like it is an excellent card in the Azalea matchup.
So this is
All
a
right,
card that
we're
a lot of
gonna
people have been talking about because of its interaction with the fact that you have actually more good crank cards in the deck
right.
compared to before. Do you want to explain kind of like the idea behind this card and then your opinion on it?
Sure. So the fundamental idea behind system reset is kind of exactly what the name says. It lets you sort of reset all of your items. You can banish your items with crank and then put them all back into play, and then they re-trigger that crank, which lets you gain a bunch of extra action points. And also, because a bunch of items came into play, you put a bunch of counters on the gun. So that's the sort of idea behind system reset, and why I think a lot of people are getting very excited about it. Is you kind of have this Christmas land of I have 6 items out. I'm gonna pitch 2 blues, play the system reset, blink all of my items, gain 6 action points, put 6 counters on my gun. I have 3 cerebellum processors, so I can spend 3 of those action points to draw 3 more cards, and then just pew 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 with this gun, and just do all of the things that are awesome, and
Build your
that's
own high
super.
octane.
Yeah, like, and that's kind of like where like on its surface, that's sort of what this card feels like it should be doing, and that's I think you'll probably see like I can almost guarantee once the new Dash deck comes out, you're gonna start seeing like screenshots on Twitter of that scenario of someone going, "Look at me, I did 67 damage with a double system reset high octane turn that just did all the things." And what you're not gonna see is a bunch of screenshots of the hands that are system reset blue boom grenade max V 1 boost card and 1 item in play and go, this hand is just unplayable. I think the number of times that system reset is going to be a cracked bauble, and arguably like worse than a cracked bauble, because like I should say worse than a cracked bauble, but like a cracked bauble in Dash IO is significantly worse than it is in other heroes
Well, yeah, because it's a
because
generic and she whiffs her boost.
Yeah. um, but it's kind of the same thing. Like this isn't a generic, but this is a card that does not have boost on it. This is a card that doesn't make boom grenades hit. We talk about like any card that's not connecting boom grenades
It's that
needs
Runeblade
to have a
hand problem we were
really
talking
good.
about earlier, where it's you've got these two halves of the deck kind of fighting against each other, and you need like the proper mix of things for your deck to function.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And like system reset works very well with exactly Cerebellum Processor. Does not work particularly well with cards like Boom Grenade. Like if I'm trying to connect with Boom Grenades and I draw a system reset, yeah, I can put the counter back on that grenade and try and delay it for another turn, but then I'm not gaining the action point from the system reset. So all I'm really doing is saying, hey, because I had this system reset in my hand, I failed at connecting with this grenade. Now I'm going to just spend a full card to sort of try and do it again next turn and hope that my next turn doesn't have another system reset in it. The number of hands that just don't work with it just feels so high. And even in like, we can talk about some of the less extreme kind of Christmas land scenarios where you're like, okay, I have 3 items and 2 of them are cerebellum processors, which even this is not going to come up that often, but like this is like your best case where you're not like omega high rolling, right? You're just like looking at your possible reasonable cases. Having 2 cerebellums and a third item is pretty rare, but possible. So in that situation, you're going to spend a blue and a system reset. And you're going to blink 3 items because it costs X, so it's going to cost 3. You're going to blink 3 items. You've now spent 2 cards and an action point. And you are going to gain 3 action points, assuming you crank all 3 items. And then spend 2 of those action points on the cerebellum processors to draw 2 cards. So we have now spent 2 cards and an action point for 2 cards and an action point.
This is all
And
assuming though that we didn't draw with the cerebellums before doing any of this, though, right?
sure, but like that's kind of like irrelevant because that draw is still going to be that draw. Like that draw is going to happen whether or not you had the system reset. Like if you have the ability to generate previous action points with the cerebellum processor and draw cards off of that, you were going to do that whether or not you had the system reset.
Well, it means that you
Um,
can do it twice in the same round, right?
Sort of, but like I said, because you are invested, like you have used that system reset or the cerebellum processor to go +1 card.
Mhm.
You were going to use that to go +1 card whether or not you had the system reset, but now you're going to spend a card and a system reset to go +2 more cards, and like so you just spend 2 cards to gain 2 activations.
Yeah, so you're like
For
neutral on
purposes
that.
right. So like even in your like pretty kind of high roll scenarios, all you've done is gone neutral. Like you haven't actually gained any cards on this turn. Like there is a discussion for it for like you did gain 1 future turn on it, and that's relevant. The fact that like you are spending those resources on this turn to gain 1 additional activation of the cerebellum on a future turn can be relevant. And that's like if the system reset ever sees any real play, it's going to be for that. It's going to be for setting up like you're spending resources now to just gain an additional activation of it later. Um, but then again, like if you have 2 cerebellums, which is really I think where you hit break even. Like anything less than 2 cerebellums, you're actually like below break even on system reset. You're now spending more resources than you're gaining, because you have to pitch, you have to spend the action point, and you have to spend the system reset. Where like if you only have 1 cerebellum, you're not actually getting ahead. Um, so the only way you're really getting ahead on it is you are spending all the resources now for potential uses of cerebellum on your next turn. But now you have 2 cerebellums, and you kind of have to now hope that you have some other action point generation on your follow-up turn, or you're going to be just wasting those extra cerebellum activations. And because you don't have that much knowledge of what your next hand is going to look like, there's going to be a lot of times where you're going to put the system reset in your deck, you're going to hit the actual like high roll side of this, and then you're going to go into your next turn and you're just going to not find a grenade off the top of your deck. You're not going to find a high octane, and then just not even use those resources. So like having this card that already kind of needs to high roll, and then its high roll still being not super reliable feels very sketchy to me. I don't really see the appeal of this other than people wanting to have a good time at their armory and post a screenshot of the one time they got to do a 57 damage turn with it. I think the number of times you're going to draw this card and you're just not going to have any items in play, and this card is just actually a brick, are going to be significantly higher than the number of times that you're going to get to send that 57 damage turn.
Yeah, that all seems very reasonable. It's inconsistent, and the floor and ceiling are like, are they worth it?
Yeah, like Dash IO is a hero already who the whole real goal of your deck is juggling your RNG. Like your deck is built to mitigate RNG and to try and take advantage of like, okay, how can I make this deck that really is fundamentally about randomness? Like your deck is hinged on where the grenades are in your deck and where you find those high octanes and where you can find those cerebellum processes and when you can find the things to line up. If Dash IO is going to high roll, you're gonna die anyway. If Dash IO is just getting super lucky and just goes grenade, 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 processor, 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 you're dead. Like, there's so few heroes that can survive that onslaught already. Adding more cards that increase the ceiling by significantly lowering the floor isn't
Do, do
helping.
you think
Like,
there's any
it's not.
value in bringing it in for that to have that ceiling against like a fatigue deck?
I see. This is like the thing. I just don't see it. I think you have so many other tools against fatigue that are very good and are very reliable. Like the fact that, we have access to very, very consistent max V setups now are going to be very good into those fatigue matchups. I think the only way I would consider this into fatigue is if I went into that matchup and said, this matchup is impossible. The only way I can win this game is if I just get obscenely lucky. I think is the only time I'm ever considering a card like this. And I just don't see that with the current Dash IO build. Um, I think the current Dash IO build has a lot of other tools into the fatigue matchups that are very solid and are very reasonable tools that are significantly more consistent than just kind of hoping I get a 57 damage Omega high roll system reset turn that's just gonna kind of gum up every other time. I just don't see that being a necessary thing.
I think that's a decent segue to talk about fatigue. What do you think about
Sure.
this deck into fatigue? Because that's we touched on it a little bit. Yeah, like that's like a strategy that a lot of people will try to attack this deck with because it does kind of deck
Mhm.
itself out over the course of the game. And we've seen a very recent resurgence in people kind of taking that approach of the count your blessings decks of trying to fatigue everything, and everyone calling for bans. Do you think this deck struggles into fatigue? Do you think that it's an issue for the deck? And how are you approaching those kind of matchups?
So I think Dasho absolutely has a weakness into block heavy, disruption heavy fatigue. Um, Decks that like we've seen previously, like Victor and Bravo, and like the very heavy Guardian block out fatigue, um, and even Enigma to a lesser extent. Enigma has some other like little issues with playing into Dasho just based on how her hands line up and like the fact that she has a bunch of no blocks can kind of gum up things. But generally the decks that Dasho is the most scared of are the fatigue guardian style decks that are going to block you very efficiently, have a lot of armor to make sure that you can't connect with those boom grenades, and then also can punish your setup turns, because the way you typically want to push through the fatigue is by taking those setup turns where you're just like, okay, I'm not going to play anything this turn. I'm going to just play a Teklo Pounder. I'm going to try to play like maybe a core, set an arsenal, and have these like 5 to like pseudo 6 card hands to try to kind of push over those blocks. And the decks like Bravo and and Victor are very good at punishing those setups. If you take that setup turn and give them breathing room, and then Bravo just goes, all right, here's my crippling crush. Well, they've just undone your entire setup turn. And I think those kind of fatigue decks will always be a problem for Dash.io, just because they just have the tools that they need to survive your onslaught, as well as make it very hard for you to push over their blocks. Testa Strength in particular out of Victor is also very, very good at covering a bunch of boom grenades. Having that extra 4 that then draws a card is huge. That said, you mentioned the Count Your Blessings decks. Funny thing about the Count Your Blessings decks, they want to play this very long value game with you. They want to say, hey, I may not block, I may not even be particularly disruptive, but I don't think you have enough numbers in your deck to kill me. If those decks are not being proactive blocking, those decks are going to learn really quickly that, yes, you have more than enough damage to kill them. I'm actually significantly less worried about the Count Your Blessings decks than I am the more traditional fatigue decks, just because those decks just went, I'm going to put 9 0 blocks in my deck that don't do anything until I get to like very close to second cycle. They want to be able to play out all 9 Count Your Blessings. This might come as a surprise, but that game is going to end before you find the 9th Count Your Blessings. I can guarantee it. One way or the other, you're going to either be dead or Dash is not going to have any cards left. So
Turns
Count
out
Your
also
Blessings.
adding a bunch of non-blocks to your deck makes boom grenades much easier to connect with.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly it. Like the Count Your Blessings fatigue decks are not fatiguing on the access that Dio is particularly scared of. Like I say, they're trying to just raw numbers you over the course of like 15 turns, and you're not gonna go 15 turns against Dio. Like you just never will go 15 turns against Dio. One of the two of you are going to be dead after about 10 turns. Either you have already died to the boom grenades that you can no longer stop, or you have successfully blocked her out and Dio doesn't have a deck left. The Count Your Blessing thing is kind of funny into Dash Out, just by the nature of like they're trying to play for this long game value that is just never going to come.
Mm-hmm.
Like win or lose, they are never going to cast the 9th Count Your Blessings unless something really weird has happened.
They just
Um,
like draw all of them at the beginning, and you didn't put enough
yeah, like
pressure
if your
on.
just hand is just
Okay.
2 blues and 3 Count Your Blessings with an arsenal, and then another 2 blues and 2 Count Your Blessings, another 2 blues and 2 Count Your Blessings.
Like they hit the top
Uh,
5% of their draws, you hit the bottom 5% of your draws. It's
yeah,
like,
like that just
okay.
seems like, because even if they just find all 9 Count Your Blessings, they have not blocked a single card, and they're probably just dead anyway.
So
So
outside of
yeah,
that,
I'm not.
how are we approaching the fatigue matchups then? Because sounds like for that
So,
you're just pushing, just play your normal game plan, maybe slight
yeah,
adjustments, but just like what you're doing just lines up well into them naturally. But the other
right.
style of fatigue, what's the general approach to that? What cards matter? What is our overarching game plan?
For the more block heavy fatigue lists, the two things that you really always want to be doing is you always want to be looking for ways that you can push those grenades, because pushing grenades in those matchups are significantly harder. They have a lot more block value, they have a lot more armor, they have a lot more 4 blocks particularly, um, and are much better at stopping those grenades. And you really need to try your best to connect with as many grenades as you can. And that usually means, taking those setups, taking those 5 card hands. Those 5 card hands are going to be very, very important to try and push grenades through the fatigue block. Um, and this is where like we talk about just using Cerebellum Processor at its level 1, at just saying I'm going to get to play 2 5 card hands back to back is just very, very important for those. If you don't have an arsenal on a turn going into a fatigue matchup, you are probably not going to be able to connect with a grenade on that turn. Like if you find a grenade and you just don't have a 5 card hand, you are probably just wasting cards out of your deck to make them block, which is what they were going to do anyway.
So you're
So
trying to
like,
set up these
it,
big rounds.
yeah. So like you definitely want to be like arsenal as much as possible. If you have a hand that doesn't have an arsenal, maybe consider sending very light on that turn. Like you can send like just enough to sort of make them block a little, so that they have a harder time with a crackback. So they maybe can't send that Spinal Crush back at you, or have that Enigma play out 2 more wards from her hand. Like, you want to send like just enough pressure to kind of keep them on the back foot, but you want to be making sure that you are prioritizing getting that arsenal down so that you can make sure that your follow-up turn is stronger and is more capable of sending that damage. The other thing we're going to be looking for are, these power cards that we talked about, the high octanes and the max velocities in particular. Max velocity, we sort of touched on it before, very, very good at pushing through these fatigue turns. You said it yourself. It is not a lot of decks that can block 3 boosts and a 10 and still stop a grenade. So like, you want to be looking for these max Vs and setting that up and kind of planning your game plan around being able to send these really big turns. Same thing with high octane, where we talked about high octane being able to, even aside from the cerebellum processor interactions, which are also just excellent, being able to have high octane plus cerebellum processor and just draw all these extra cards and just like really, really extend your turn. Even just being able to have the high octane with 6 gun counters and send, you can set up a core and 5 boosts and a high octane and just go boost, 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 gun, 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 is just a huge amount of damage, which doesn't push the grenade particularly well. Like, that's the only real problem with like high octane into the gun, is these are turns where you're probably like, there's a reasonable chance that you still can't push through the grenade. Although just sending 4 to 5 boosts in a turn can potentially just enable the grenades anyway. But oftentimes with that, you're just looking to get that extra value to just send 5 to 6 gun counters all at once, and just here's 10 extra damage that is very, very hard for you to block.
And they can't
Um,
defend the gunshots if they're going to defend the boom grenade usually too. Like
exactly.
they got to pick one or the other, and they're usually going to take the 2-2-2-2.
Yeah. You are almost never going to be able to play a long game with fatigue decks. Like, your damage is just like, by the nature of just the way boost works, you are going to run out of cards before them. Like, there's none of this where like, sometimes you can play the fatigue through damage if with other decks. Like, I've done this with like Aurora sometimes, where you're like, oh, I know you're gonna try to fatigue me, so I'm just going to make sure that I'm like sending my weapon every turn and just being very efficient with my damage. And I'm just going to run you out of cards. That is sometimes an option with some other aggro decks. I know Phi was particularly good at this, with the ability to just recur Phoenix Flames and send Searing Emberblade. Dash.io is not one of those decks.
You're
Dash.io is
trading your
not a
deck
deck.
into damage.
Yeah. You are never going to be in a position with Dash.io where you can play just the efficiency value game with a fatigue deck and just try to kind of counter fatigue them. Like, because you are trading your deck for that extra damage and that extra consistency in just like all these go agains, you will run out of cards significantly before your opponent's going to. And you have to always kind of keep that in mind. Like, I think that's one of the other things that is very important, is that every card in your deck, when playing into a fatigue matchup, is important. Every time you boost, every time you activate Foundry Heart or activate the Heavy Industry Gear Shift, you are just decreasing your clock. It's something like, you'll see me, if I'm playing in a fatigue matchups, you'll see often I will send my last boost attack for the turn and not boost it. One, because like I said, we're looking to like stack up those gun counters so that we can set the big high octane turns, but also being able to just like send that last attack and not take an extra card out of my deck can sometimes be very relevant. And sometimes that can be, make or break on those last turns where you're just like, man, I just needed 3 more cards in my deck. Because something worth kind of mentioning, the way boost works, if you have no cards left in your deck, if you boost, you do not get the go again. Because there was no mechanologist card to reveal, there's nothing to give you that action point back. You can go into your final turn of the game, your opponent can be at 1, and you can have a max V and 4 boost cards and 3 Techlo cores, and it does not matter, because you can no longer get those go agains to play out that last turn. So being very, very mindful of how many cards you are taking out of your deck and on any given turn is very, very important. Because like I say, like sometimes you're going to come down to that last turn of the game and you're like, man, I have all the damage to kill you. I have everything I need. I have all my tools. But because I was a little flippant with maybe like activating Teklo Foundry Heart one too many times, I just do not have the cards left to boost to close this game out. And I've seen a lot of Dash AO games end that way because it doesn't matter what those cards were. It's just you needed cards physically in your deck to close the game.
Mhm.
And I think that's something that's very important that people don't think about very often when playing these fatigue matchups. They just go, "Oh, I just want to do as much damage as I can," and are just really pushing, like we talk about like activating Foundry Heart regularly, or boosting when you might not need to boost, just to like be able to get that extra pistol shot in right now rather than getting that pistol shot later.
It's like tunnel
Um,
visioning on the end of game Talishar stats of looking at average value per turn damage presented. It's like, well,
yeah,
that doesn't win you the game because that number is big. What wins the
yeah,
game is
absolutely.
reducing their life to 0. So, like a way I like to describe it is creating actualized damage into your opponent. The boom grenades, they're so good because if they hit, it is actualized damage into your opponent. And the high octane, same thing. If we consider the gunshots as always hitting, it's actualized damage into our opponent.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a very good way to kind of look at it. Like when you play in the aggro matchups, it's okay to sort of look at that turn to turn, just like, okay, I just want to do the most I can do with these 4 cards or these 5 cards. When you play into fatigue, you are no longer saying, how much damage can I do with these 5 cards? You have to say, how much damage can I do with these 60 cards? And that's a very different question, and it's a very different way of kind of looking at your matchup. Sometimes it is fine to take that turn to say, you know what, I'm just not going to attack you at all. I might IP myself, but I'm going to take this turn to just go play a or play a Teklo Core, arsenal a high octane, and I know there's a Maxby on top of my deck that I'm going to just draw with these other 2 cards that I'm just going to full hold, and know that I'm going to set up a cracked chess piece into high octane into this max V turn next turn, and I'm going to do 28 damage that you're not going to be able to block. Whereas if I had just sent this hand this turn, I might have done 12 and just you'd have given me your hand, and then I'm going to be back in the same position next turn.
Especially if you still
Um,
have the armor up. It's really nice doing that where it's like maybe I fish for them blocking with 1 to 2 cards because I don't want them to have necessarily like let's go to the Bravo example again. Maybe I don't want them to
mhm,
have 4 cards because crippling crush. I can't do shit about that. But if
yeah,
they block with 2 cards because that's their game plan, what are they doing with the last 2 cards? The best they could do is maybe throw a CNC at me. Well, that's why I have my
mhm,
fridge. This is my spot. I'm gonna make that bet that you can't actually meaningfully interact with me this round. And
yeah, absolutely.
if you have anything, I have my armor. I'm making
Mhm.
the bet that I think you wanted to block with those 2 cards here.
Yeah, and like I said, and particularly into we talk about some of these more fatigue decks that don't quite have as much disruption as like Bravo and Victor do. We talk about like Enigma. Enigma's got a little bit. Sometimes she'll play CNC, she'll play weakest links, but beyond that, she doesn't have a whole lot of actual disruption. Um, to where like sometimes it's fine to just be like, you know what, have your hand. I don't think you're gonna do enough damage with it. Maybe you'll send a Miraging Metamorph and play like, and like maybe you'll play out a ward, and the wards can be relevant, but like sometimes it's okay to just IP yourself in fatigue matchups if you can just say, I don't think I was going to do very much this turn. I don't think you're going to do that much to me. My life total is not that relevant because that's not your game plan. I'm just going to stop here. I know there's a max V on top of my deck. I'm just going to IP2 Arsenal set up for this really big turn. And I think that's something that like when you first play Flesh and Blood, it gets drilled out of you really hard that like it is never okay to just hold cards. You always want to spend your whole hand every turn. And the majority of the time that's true. But sometimes, particularly into fatigue, when you stop looking at how much damage can these 4 cards do and start looking at how much damage can these 60 cards do, sometimes that's just correct. Sometimes you've now like kept 2 more cards in your deck. They've sent back damage that doesn't feel relevant, and now you're setting up for this very big damage turn that is capable of doing a lot of harm to your opponent, and still leaving you with more resources to do that again later. I think that's a hard thing for people to learn playing into fatigue, is that sometimes it is okay to take inefficient single turns if it means that your overall game plan is stronger.
The macro versus the micro of the game.
Right. Yeah, yeah, exactly. which, like I say, into like the aggro matchups, this is the thing that you would probably never want to do. You're never gonna just like hold 2 cards, play a pounder, pass into the Zen matchup, but like into the Victor matchup, that might very reasonably be something that you want to do. And I think just looking for those windows and looking for the times, when is it correct to push, when is it better to just take a small turn and take some setup, when is it to just take nothing, just set up and just prepare for a really big turn. Um, and I think that's actually one of the things too, talking about like with Dash IO, knowing the top card of your deck can also really impact that, because you can kind of plan a little bit for those future turns where like, maybe you don't want to boost that high octane off because you're going to need that, and that high octane is worth more than sending this extra zipper hit this turn.
Yeah, maybe it's like your
Um,
last high octane and you've got 6 counters on your gun, and you
yeah,
know that you're going to end the game with those on there if you don't actually
yeah.
get to cast this.
Yeah, exactly. And I think making sure that you are using all of the information available to you to make the most educated turns, I think, is something that Dash IO exclusively kind of gets to do better than other heroes, because you have so much extra information. And I think it's really cool. It's one of the things that I really love about this hero.
Wrapping things up, what do you see as Dash's overall place in the metagame post getting the Armory deck, going into the last half of the ProQuest season and going into Worlds?
Dash IO tier.
It's not S tier, it's Dash IO tier.
No,
It's just
no, it's
she's
Dash IO.
usurped that.
Yeah, I think it's just Dash IO tier. I mean, like there are definitely going to be things that people can do to target this deck, but I will say anyone testing for Worlds and testing for the latter half of ProQuest season, when after the Dash IO deck comes out, be ready for this deck, because this deck was already pretty scary. Like I say, I took this deck to a 7-1 at Nationals and felt very good about it. And then I was 10-4 at the Calling, I think. The next whatever major event. I've been playing this deck for a while now, into some pretty solid results already.
Amsterdam?
Yeah, it was Calling in Amsterdam. Yeah. I did not do particularly well in MST draft. So yeah, but yeah, calling it was Calling Amsterdam. I was 10-4. Probably could have done a little bit better on that one too. I think there was a couple of games that even I made a few mistakes on, but overall, deck very, very powerful. And the deck is just about to get an absolute adrenaline shot. Um, anyone not respecting this deck is in for a rude awakening, I think. Make absolutely sure that you have a plan to deal with Dash IO if you are not looking to play the deck. And even if you are looking to play the deck, I think have a plan for the mirror match. Know what you're doing. I think
TikTok.
I yeah, I strongly recommend like cards like TikTok Clock. I've even been kind of considering System Failure. System Failure is a very interesting card in the Dash IO mirror now. It's great for just yeah. Yeah, we have
I
it
just
pulled up already.
I had system up.
Yeah. So System Failure is a great way to just kill a Cerebellum processor, or more importantly, just strip all the counters off of a gun. I think with Cerebellum processor eating significantly more of our action points than it used to, you're going to see a lot of dash arrows with just 6 gun counters, to where you're really going to be leaning on those high octane turns to really do a lot of your damage now. And System Failure just kind of says, nah, I'd rather you not. Um, System Failure, if you strip 6 gun counters, is a potential 1 for 14, which is kind of wild. I mean,
Nuts.
that's almost great. That's like gravekeeping numbers of value. If it's 6 gun counters, it's 12 damage, and it does 2 damage on its own.
I completely missed that line that it does 2 damage.
Oh, yeah, it just does 2 damage. It just does 2 damage. It's just like the 2 damage is so like tertiary, but like sometimes just 2 you. It is also 2 damage that's completely unpreventable.
Mm.
Other than like Quell, I guess.
I
But
mean, you're playing this in the mirror. You got the items that prevent damage.
Sure. I hate those items. I hate those items so much. I know some people really love them, but like we talk about things that are just counter to the deck's original game plan of just like find boom grenades, play boom grenades. And every time that I play a damage prevention item off the top and then look at the top card and it's a boom grenade and I've already spent my item activation for damage prevention, I just want to die. And controversially, every time I'm like, oh, there's a boom grenade on top, but my hand is 2 damage prevention items that I can't attack. I'm not 100% sure that System Failure makes the cut yet, but like It is a very good, like, 'cause it's very narrow. Like, it pretty much
Yeah.
is exclusively Dash AO. It is kind of funny into Max, because you can just
Poor
blank.
guy.
Yeah, Max. I feel really bad for Max right now because like Max was like so close to being a good deck, and the Dio deck gives Max a ton of new tools. Some of these cards are excellent for Max. Like even the equipment that was like okay for Dash is like amazing for Max. Max is so happy to have that new headpiece. Like
Hmm.
it's just excellent for him. But like we're about to go into a format where the dashes are running TikTok clocks and everyone else is running a race face. And like I think we're gonna start seeing like smashing good times come out of some other decks
Does
too.
that destroy the mech
And like
suit? Is the mech suit an
system
item?
failure.
No, 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 no. Is the mech
System Oh
mechanoid?
yes, the mech suit is an item. Yeah, mech suit is an
So
item.
you just smash it.
Yeah, yeah, you can absolutely smash the mech suit. It's pretty funny. Max is in for a rough couple of
Poor
weeks, I
guy.
think.
And then he's maybe gonna lose the gun also.
Oh yeah, true. And then once regular dash rotates, then he's probably gonna lose the gun too.
So basically, sounds like Dash is the deck to beat. You're either playing Dash or you're playing a deck that has any amount of game into Dash.
Yeah, I think so. I think you definitely, at the very least, should be playing a deck that you feel very comfortable in the Dash AO matchup, which probably means having a solid fatigue plan, because there's not a lot of decks that are looking to be able to race this.
Yeah, they're like you just output way more damage than anything else. Like you
Hmm.
just can't play the game against this.
Yeah, there's very few decks that can try to do comparable amounts of damage. I think pretty much anything that's going to be playing against this is most likely going to be looking to just play the defensive game. Like there's a couple of decks that can kind of get close. Like I mean, you can get some kind of high roll KO turns with some real big blood rushes.
You also got the item
It's gonna be rough.
destruction.
Yeah, the item destruction I think helps. I think having item destruction in your sideboard is definitely gonna help against this deck just to kind of keep the processors in check. Plus, like blowing up cores and things like that are also just always going to be relevant.
All right. So any closing thoughts on the deck list before we finish up?
I think we've covered just about everything. I think deck looks real good. It's just gonna have a ton of power, and I think we're gonna see this reign supreme for a little bit, and then High Octane's gonna get banned, and
Enjoy
then
it
we'll
while you can.
reevaluate. Yeah.
All right. Where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Blackwing Studio. I'm pretty active on social media. I'm pretty much there most hours of my day. I also have a Patreon where I currently have a 45-page Dash IO primer that I haven't even added all the new stuff to, and I'm probably going to be doing that in this next week, maybe two, with a big update with all the new items and all the new stuff and some of the stuff that we talked about here. And that is just also Blackwing Studio on Patreon. I've got an Etsy shop where I sell custom tokens. I've got a full line of all full original art custom tokens that you can peruse. Um,
Your
and
tokens were the
then
ones that were being used at the Realm events, right?
yeah,
So if anyone
the
went
the
to a
realm
Realm event,
tokens.
they would have seen yours.
Yeah, the realm events did have their own line of exclusive tokens. I have a separate line of tokens that I sell. Like, let's see what I have here. So I've got like there's like these cool eloquence tokens. Uh, there's a Queekin. Um, oh, lots of cool stuff. There's Rune Chant. Rune Chant. Hey, that one looks familiar. I have a brand new line of Enigma Spectral Shields in here somewhere.
Oh.
Patreon, Twitter, Etsy, those are pretty much my big three.
All that will be in the description below. And while you guys are down there, it's going to also have the deck list if you want to check this out. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you guys subscribe. If you want to see some more Mara on the channel, I have a fucking 4-hour stream where we talked about Tome in the deck if you want to hear us ramble some more. And if you're interested in seeing some Aurora content, I also have the video Bartosz coming up right before this. Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. Check out my Patreon if you want to help support more content like this. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you.
Bye.